Well, hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Bomb City Podcast. This episode is my interview with Mike LaVella. Mike's the creator of Gearhead Magazine and the founder of Gearhead Records. They're the record label that signed the Hives and brought them to the United States. He's also an author. He's written a couple books. He wrote The Hot Rod World of Robert Williams, and also the Salinas Boyz book, the book on Cole Foster. Mike's a great guy and a good friend, and I learned a lot about him in this interview. As you may or may not know, Mike was heavily involved in the early hardcore scene in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so it was really fun to hear some of his stories about that. Sit back and enjoy it. This one's a bit of a long one again, but I think you'll really like it. Here it is, episode 10 of the Bomb City Podcast. Mike LaVella. Thanks for listening.
What? Really? You know, I expected like a really intense line of questioning.
It's just just conversation, not like a.
I would always, if I were you, come with some prepared questions.
All right.
I really think it puts the interviewee at ease. It looks like you did some research.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Just saying.
But it makes him all like, he gets stressed out about it then.
If you have questions, just reference. And what if you get have you ever interviewed anyone who doesn't want to talk? It's the worst.
Not yet. No,
I have. Sam Butera, specifically.
Yeah.
Sam Butera didn't even, he had I'm like, so Sam, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't know. And then he hands me his card, and he had this thing called the CRS Club, Sam Butera's Can't Remember Shit Club. He actually celebrated the fact that he couldn't remember anything.
And this is Sam Butera from...
Louis Prima's sideman.
Okay.
Louis Prima, Sam Butera, and the Wildest.
Okay.
For years. I mean, they made all these records for Capitol and Dot, and then he had his own career, too. You know, he did the soundtrack to this Tony Curtis movie called The Rat Race. It was great. I mean, he's a staple of like New Orleans. He played it. Okay, so Louis Prima's brother, Leon Prima, had a strip club, and Sam played sax like behind strippers. You know, he has all these stories. Like, imagine the stuff this guy saw in the 50s. Then finally, in 54, Louis called him out to... at Christmas out to Vegas. He's like, we got this gig, it's happening. He came out and he rearranged it. And he's the one who rearranged Just the Gigolo and all that. And everything that Louis Prima is known for was Sam. Sam did all the arrangements. He was a hell of a sax player. Neat guy, famously cheap guy, but interesting. And he interacted with, I mean, he knew Sinatra. He knew everybody. He's this guy, this wealth. And I get him. He's like, nothing, you know. Then he makes me a member of the Can't Remember Shit Club. You know, so I had to stretch that interview. I mean, this is a Gearhead number 2. I think it only ran 4 pages, and it's mostly photos. I mean, I could barely get them to talk, you know. But if you get someone that doesn't want to talk, it's really helpful to have a line of questioning, you know. Now, most people I've found really want to talk about themselves. You know, you're giving a good interview when if you've read numerous interviews with the person, and then the interview they're giving you bears no resemblance to any other interviews. For instance, the best example is the Melvins, I guess. Gearhead number 8 interviewed the Melvins, and all they wanted to talk about was the tricks that they pulled on other journalists. It's like, we told this asshole that, and we told this guy, you know, because they were on Atlantic at the time. Yeah. So I'm sure they had some real high-powered publicists, and they pranked all these people. They would tell them like totally outrageous things, but just believable enough that they would get printed, and then they would laugh that the person printed them. And they were my interview with them is them coming clean about everything they ever pulled off. That's when you know you've earned the person's trust. You know, so that those are the best interviews. You're just like, you know, you're like giddy while they're telling you stuff. You know,
was interviewing with Gearhead the first time you started doing it?
Oh, geez, no. I go back to. Okay, in '84, there was a magazine in Philly called Terminal, and they were nationally distributed. They weren't really like punk. They were like, they would have like Sonic Youth on the cover or that scene. They were really into all that stuff. And he wanted a Pittsburgh correspondent, the guy who published it. I don't know why. And he kept hearing about the Five, who were like Big Fish, Small Pond. Reed Paley, singer, who's gone on to make records with Black Francis, from the Pixies and stuff. He makes a living as a singer-songwriter, not easy. Sort of a punk rock Jewish Lee Hazelwood, if you will. But he I love Reed Paley. He's a good friend. He was a mentor, really. He was the one who, when I was in Half-Life, when I first started, he was the one who was like, here's how you put up flyers. Here's where you this. Here's that. He would show me like how to get the most bang out of Pittsburgh. You know, it's like you go to other, because then you make the flyer 4 up on a 8.5, 11 piece of paper so that you can cut it and leave little stacks. Like if X were playing or something, he's like, this is where, you know, you're going to grab, if you get 3 people that have never been to the Banana before, like our little punk venue, you know, you did a good job. Like, you know, he was instrumental in getting me to, you know, just to show me the ropes, basically. It really took me under his wing. And so Terminal wanted a story about the Five, so I wrote it, and that was the first thing I ever had published. That was in '84. I started corresponding to Maximum Rock and Roll. I started writing scene reports. I wrote a few. Yeah, and then we had a little zine called Beyond Good and Evil in Pittsburgh, which was largely a flyer. The back cover was a flyer for whatever was the next big upcoming show. And then we would make it, and it was only, it was 2 pages, 8.5, 11, Xerox folded, so you'd have, it looked like an 8-page zine, you know. And we would interview people. We interviewed the bands that no one interviewed. We interviewed the Vampire Lesbos. We interviewed Iron Fist, which ended up Tom Hazelmeyer from AMREP's brother was in that band, Tim Hazelmeyer. But unbeknownst to us at that time, AMREP didn't exist yet. So years before Helmet and all that stuff. But so I had my own little zine, and it was free. I was really big on just, you know, we knew people at Kinko's, whatever, you know, it was typical punk rock, like Sneak It, or somebody worked in an office that'd run off 100. You know, and then would collate it and staple it and give them out to kids. And I wanted to make it free so nobody could bitch about it. That was like my big thing. I didn't want anyone, I paid a quarter and I hate this thing. You know, so I mean, like fear of you know, rebellion against poor quality, I guess. So I mean, no, I made it free, but it was just a thing that we did. There were 5 issues, I think, and it's just we just did it. But it was cool. I certainly interviewed people and all that. And then in 1987, Half-Life played at Gilman, and we got interviewed for Flipside at Gilman, actually. That Flipside interview with Half-Life took place at Gilman. But Tim Yohannan, we were out there talking, and he was like, you know, he would smoke. He always had a cigarette in his mouth, and he would hit the cigarette harder than anyone I've ever seen in my life. Like by half the cigarette would go down, you know. He's like LaVella. He's like, if you could write the way you talk, you'd be great. And I'm like, really? He's like, he's just liked the way I talked. He liked the cadence of my voice and like the way I would, you know, tell a story or whatever, you know. And he was like, if you come out here, you got a job. And I'm like, what does that mean? Nobody got paid there, but actually he would. You know, at the end of the year, they did a financial disclosure, said how much money they came in, and whatever was left, they'd cut us each a check. And they would cut you a check based on how long you were there. And I remember, hell, toward the end, I was probably getting like around Christmas, you'd get a check for like $250, which is great at that time of your life when you're, you know, my rent was $400 a month. And I was living in the Tenderloin, you know. I mean, that was, you know, it was great. It was great that he did that. But they were a resource. They were like a wealth. You'd go there and there was all those records and magazines. And it was a good thing for me to be involved in. I stayed out of the politics. Tim was famously a communist, you know, and he was an Iranian communist from New Jersey. He had everything going against him that you could ever, you know. But I respected Tim a lot because he said, you know, we're going to start this magazine, and he did it. We're going to start a radio show, and he did it. We're going to start a club, and they did it. We're going to start a record store, and they did it with Epicenter Zone. And then they had Pressure Drop Press. I think he put money in, whatever. And like, he really lived what he talked. And a lot of people talk shit on Tim, but he was the one who really said, you should write. So I screwed around with writing, but it wasn't until MRR. So I move out here, and I have no idea. You know, I married a lesbian, famously, so I could move out here. It's true. And she's great. She still lives in Berkeley. We're still friends. But we had to move to the Tenderloin. We had no money at all. Whatever money I had, we were coming across America in the Half-Life van, and of course I was stopping at record stores. So whatever I left with, like, I arrived with less, you know. But man, you could buy. That's when you could buy, like, find a Funkadelic record for $4. I'm really glad what I bought. Everything I bought is worth. I mean, the 40 I spent is worth 400 today. I'm sure, you know, or whatever. Buying the right records is never a bad investment, and it certainly kept me alive through the thin times, selling a record here and there to keep it going, you know. But so when we got here, it was just like the Tenderloin. And
when did you get here? What year?
September 1988. I got here. I left. So 1988, Half-Life was still together. We played, we recorded our album, and I left. And I gave the tape to my friend, and I said, find a label. And they did. Skyclad put it out, and then it actually did come out and everything. But and then we did a 7-inch before I left, our second single. So, and then our first tape that we did came out on Get Hip too. He eventually put it out. It came out posthumously, but so everything we ever recorded actually ended up on vinyl, which is nice.
Yeah.
I got here in September of '88, moved into the Tenderloin, went on a Sunday to look at the place, and it was like the one quiet time we moved in. And then of course we tried to move in, and it's, you know, I remember like having to ask police to move the wall of prostitutes they were arresting from the door so we could carry our stuff in, you know, the urine-soaked doorway, you know, it's horrible, you know, but that's what we could afford. So, and no credit check, by the way. Yeah. We could have never passed a credit check. So they were just like, oh, you have money? Come on in. And I remember it was first month's rent and last month's only. There was no security or anything. So, you know, and it was $675 a month. So I guess we had the $1,300 and that was it. I remember we're writing the check and then we both had $0. I think I had $1 and, you know, my ex had $5 or something. So we're like, well, better get jobs, you know, literally. And it was that tight, you know. We just made it. But Tim Yohannan, true to his word, you know, as soon as I showed up, he's like, hey, come on over. And he started assigning me records to review. And that's really how it started, was reviewing records. But I got a job at Bay Area Records and Tapes. It's not there anymore. 1444 Polk Street at California, where the cable car turns around. My boss, Lloyd Stanford, died of cheapness. He's the only human being I ever know who died of... He was so cheap. He was so cheap that he wouldn't buy a meal if it was more than $1.99. And back then you could get $1.99. You could get like 2 eggs scrambled, home fries and toast for $1.99. And then he would just slather everything in butter. And he just dropped dead one day. And he couldn't have been, I don't even know if he was 60 years old, but he was so cheap. It was crazy. Anyway, so I started working there, $4.50 an hour. And I was, within a couple months, I was raised to the lofty position of assistant manager and $5.50 an hour. So, you know, Frankie from Crime walked in, you know, famous, you know, the San Francisco punk band of all time, Crime. He walked in, I'm like, are you Frankie Fix? And he's like, hey, you know, I'm like, I want to interview you. And he's like, hey, all right. And he wrote his address. He didn't have a phone. He wrote his address on a matchbook, which I still have, of course. And it was like he probably had money at one time. It was like a pretty nice apartment. It was rent controlled. And he's hanging on to it, you know. And I went over there and I interviewed him, and Tim Yohannan made it the cover story of MRR. So the first interview I ever did was the cover story. And so I was like, wow, you know. And then I interviewed, like Sub Pop was happening then. I interviewed Bruce Pavin, Jonathan Poneman. Then I did a big interview with Tim Kerr. And then I interviewed the Cynics at one point. I would just, whatever I thought the zine was missing, Mudhoney. Yeah. That's how I got my job at Thrasher. I interviewed Mudhoney, and I had so much stuff. Pusshead called me and said, you know, I want to do a Mudhoney thing. I understand that you know them. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know them. I know them as well as anyone who met them once and interviewed them. But yeah, I have all this stuff. And he's like, can you write a piece that doesn't have anything that's in the MRR? I'm like, absolutely, because I interviewed them, like, I mean, I want to say at least 2 60-minute tapes, and they're all talking. It was hilarious, you know. And we're all still friends too. That's crazy. We really, they're remarkable guys. Really, really, really decent human beings, you know. And I always said it should have been them, not Nirvana, but oh well. But anyway, Mudhoney. So then that's how this Thrasher job started, and then they paid me. They paid. Yeah. I mean, if you wrote an article for Thrasher, you got paid like $75, $125. Like, it was really, you know, bear in mind, if your rent's $400 a month and you're getting $100 from writing a paragraph, that's, you know what I mean? Like, it was really lucrative. And then they gave you fucking hoodies and skate decks and trucks and, you know, so much Thrasher stuff, you know, and it was great. So then Thrasher, that opened doors. Now, once I started writing for Thrasher, you could get in anywhere. And the I-Beam, the Kennel Club, you know, the Covered Wagon Saloon, the Night Break on Haight Street. All those venues were open, and you could easily see a good band, not even just an okay band, but a good band 4 or 5 nights a week back then, late 80s, early 90s. And it's really kind of a golden era. I find myself being really drawn. I'm melancholy about it, I guess.
Nostalgic?
Very, very nostalgic about that period, because you had the Fluid, and you had, and again, the aforementioned, I saw Nirvana open for Bad Mother Goose at the Covered Wagon Saloon. I saw I saw Soundgarden open for Tragic Mulatto. Like, you know what I mean? It was so wildly disproportionate, but those bands were starting out, and I saw like just some of the best stuff ever, and in the smallest, most intimate venues. I'm really happy. Now, of course, in Pittsburgh, I started, so Real Enemy, my first band was in 1983, then Half-Life was 84 to 88, and we opened for everybody. We played with everybody. We played with them. If the Minutemen came, we played with them. If Sam Hain came, we played with them. Like, a normal scene would have a band much more suited to open for the Minutemen, and then like some spooky kids more suited to open for Sam Hain, but we were basically it. There were times when we were like the only band, and then there were some other bands, and I had a label called Mind Cure, and we would put out tapes. We would put out, because it was easier to put out a tape, and there were other bands, and we put out, and very recently, in the last 3 years, this guy Mike Siemens in Pittsburgh has Mind Cure Records now, and he meticulously like reissued everything on vinyl for the first time, and wisely hired me to write the liner notes. And so I wrote these these really elaborate liner notes, like really dense, comprehensive. Awesome. My memory for the 80s is really, really good. My memory for last week is not great. I can't tell you the name of the last person I sold a car to. I can't. I really can't. But I can tell you what, like, Husker Du were wearing on April 28th, 1983, when we opened for them.
What were they wearing?
Well, Bob was wearing a checkered button-down shirt and jeans with a hole in the knee. Grant Hart was wearing a wife beater while he was playing, and these weird sort of purplish shorts. And Greg was also wearing a button-down shirt, but it was tucked in, which I thought was interesting, and jeans, and like a pretty nice pair of tennis shoes. Yeah. Anyway, they were very normal guys. Husker Du. Gay, except for the one with the giant mustache was straight. Huh. Yeah. So they were the opposite of. They broke every cliche mustache-wise. Anyway,
I don't really get them. They never.
Really great guys, friends. I showed up in Andrew Earl of Magnet wrote a book about Husker Du about 3 years ago now, and he interviewed me, and my story of me watching Bob Mould take a bath ended up in this book about Husker Du, and I love that. I love being a footnote to history. I love it. My name keeps showing up in these books, punk rock books, and I'm glad, because I was there. The most common thing I hear is, God damn it, I wish I would have interviewed you first. Your memory is so much, they'll interview and then they get me at the end, and then they have to like wedge me in there, because I am a footnote, but to the history, but my memory for it is really, really good. I never smoked pot. I credit that. I think pot is ridiculous. I really do. I don't know why you would want to do something that robbed you of your ambition. Just, you know what I mean? Like, you have let's do all this. Wait, here, no, let's not do anything. Like, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. So anyway, likewise, but then on the other hand, I never wanted to take speed either. I was never like, I need this to go do it. I whatever the proper amount of just natural motivation was, I had it. Thank God.
Well, some people aren't so lucky. So some people need to turn it down, and some people need to bring it up.
I guess I was just right. Maybe. Well, not everybody wouldn't agree with that. I'm sure I'm like way too intense for some people.
That's true. At times, there's some people that would probably say, "I could use a hit."
Yeah. Well, for sure. Oh yeah, for sure. But so anyway, so so I was used to being around bands and people and everything in Pittsburgh. But when I got here, it was this other level of everybody played in San Francisco, so I finally got to see bands that I kind of always wanted to see, and they played here, and bands that missed Pittsburgh. We often had to drive to DC or Cleveland. The one time I saw the Ramones, actually I saw them twice. They did play in Pittsburgh, but not till years later. we went to Cleveland to see them, and the Pagans opened, so I got this. It was crazy. I mean, like, you never know. Like, we went up to, I was roadieing for Husker Du, and I went with them up to Cleveland because they were playing with the Fall, and I saw the Fall, Husker Du open for the Fall, like, the night after Real Enemy opened. It was crazy stuff. I mean, like, every night was just remarkable back then, and I don't know if it still is. I mean, I'm kind of convinced if we went out, we wouldn't find that level of, like...
I blame the internet.
Yeah, I don't know when was the last time it would have been really great, like when AFI were at Gilman, Screw 32, like that era was pretty exciting. There was like a lot of young punk bands, and that was probably like the last. And then if your taste ran different, there was all that Lookout stuff. You could go see the Peaches and whatever. And there was a lot of good bands in that era, like Fits of Depression and Fluff and all. I mean, there was just good bands, and now I'm not saying there's not good bands. I love Warm Soda and Ty Segall and anything Matthew Melton does, and I still keep up. I mean, I hope so. But then like some of the bands I liked then are still to get, like the Muffs just made a good record, and I mean there's good bands. I mean it's out there. But I'm gonna be 52 next month. I don't know how long I'm supposed to stand in the back nursing a lukewarm beer because I can only afford one all night. I don't know how much longer I could have kept that up, but anyway, so when I got out here, I'm very, nostalgic is the right word. I'm very nostalgic for that period, and that's where Gearhead started, because I was already writing for Thrasher, and I was writing for MRR, and I wanted to do my own thing. I got edited pretty hard at Thrasher. I remember Ray Anderson, who incidentally died today, Sonny Anderson's dad, who was Holy See Lights in the 60s. He, if you ever see Fillmore posters, it says Lights by Holy See. That was Ray. Wow. And his wife, Joan, and they're both dead. He just died today. And
oil lights?
Yeah, like they would project that crazy light. He invented that. He was the one who figured out if you put them on heat,
with the
they
clock
would
faces.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally want to buy like a rig and
overhead projector. If you use the right combination of
I have like a ghetto one. But it's not like a
he
real
could have taught you. I mean, until today. Today. So anyway, Ray told me, he said, he gave me this amazing piece of advice. He said, when you're writing an article, start strong and end strong. He's like, make the first sentence really strong and end real hard. And he goes, and actually, kind of whatever's in the middle doesn't matter as much. Like, get your points across early and late. And he goes, because they're going to edit you. He's like, almost give them something to edit. Man, was he right? Like once I did that, I'd give them because they paid by the word, right? So I would give them my 125 words that print 75, whatever it was, but that what they cut, it didn't matter. It was like extraneous. That was like some really good advice that he gave me. But I noticed that, well, first of all, there was, in the same way that in '84, I ran out and got a Misfits tattoo for fear of no one remembering the Misfits. Yeah, and I called Glenn. I'm like, Glenn, I got a Crimson Ghost tattoo. And he said, and I'll never forget it, cool, now there's like 5. So I have documented one of the first 5 Misfits tattoos. He had one, Doyle had one, Henry Rollins had one. The singer of Painful Discharge had one on his neck. Nobody remembers Painful Discharge. I do. And then me. And I think there was probably more. Now, how the hell do we know that there wasn't some kid in Japan or something? We don't know. But first 10, I think, is safe. I got it years before Cliff Burton from Metallica, certainly. Anyway. So when I got out here, I was really interested in going to like the drag races and like the Jim Davis Memorial drags they used to have on Memorial Day weekend at Sears Point. And they would bring out Pure Hell, and it was all front engine rails and all that. And everybody would bring out these muscle cars, and there was just cars everywhere. And in Pittsburgh, there's not. I mean, there's Rust. Christ, my neighbor, Mr. Souls, when we were kids, he had a Super Bee, and it was awesome. It was this 70 Super Bee. And in 1994, my little town of Hermione had our centennial. We became 100 years old, and I went home, and there were it's exactly how you imagined. Fireman's parade, cheesy, Boy Scouts marching down Main Street and all that, streamers in the spokes of their bikes, sparkle. Exactly. This is the most Norman Rockwell-esque thing you can imagine. So I'm there, and I see Mr. Souls. I'm like, whatever happened to that Superman? He goes, don't you remember? And I go, no. And he goes, by 73, it was completely rusted out. There was nothing left of it because he left it outside in Pennsylvania. It was just gone, And I think that's probably why muscle cars, people like fetishize them. They made quite a lot, but there was, well, then you have, kids wrapping them around trees and all that too. You put a 17-year-old kid in a car with 425 horsepower. He's gonna hurt himself probably. So, but anyway, so I got on here and it was just cars. And then the music, I noticed that, like Eddie from the Super Suckers had a Hot Wheels sticker on his bass. Stuff like that, was starting to show up, like 60s imagery. And bands had, like the New Bomb Turks had a song called Drag Strip Riot. And the music was a lot of the 90s garage was interested in like 60s culture, and nowhere more so than the Mummies and the Phantom Surfers and the Trash Women. All these bands were here. They were our local bands. So I'm in this scene with like long hair, so I have my grunge hair, and and it was long. I mean, it was really long because I didn't cut my hair for 5 years. So and I'm going to see like Untamed Youth, and they're like, okay, hippie, like it was like really like who's this weird dude hanging around? But so I got the idea to do Gearhead. In 91, I asked the guys, I interviewed Gashuffer, and I asked them to do shirts for me, and Don Blackstone and Joe Newton did shirts. So I actually had T-shirts and stickers almost 2 years before #1 came out. I just didn't know how to make a magazine. I interviewed the Digits, and that was an interesting interview. Rick got up and walked out. Yeah.
Did you say something shitty?
No, I just said that. So they had what I thought was a faux rivalry with Urge Overkill, and Nate Cato from Urge Overkill. I said they were staying at my house, and I said I'm going to interview Rick from the Digits, and he's like, yeah, that guy stole all his shtick from me, the suits, everything. So we sit down and interview Rick, and I go, So Nate Cato tells me you stole 100% of your shtick from him. What do you want to say about that? And he's like, this interview's over. And just walks away. So that was my first interview for Gearhead. Wow. Yeah. But Rick, I'm like, Rick.
I feel like that's kind of a confirmation.
Yeah. But I was like, Rick. And he came back and he talked to me. And it was funny. It was a good interview. It's in Gearhead #1, word for word. But it took me like 2 years to figure out how to actually publish a magazine. And the reason it had a record in it was because I worked at a record distributor. So by now I'd gone from working at a record store into record distribution. And I'm like, if I put a record in it, I'll know how to sell it. If I don't know how to really sell a magazine, I could have went to MRR. And he did help me. Tim made the call to Doug from Tower Records and said, you should buy this. And, he did help me. He helped. And we laid Gearhead #1 out at, when I say we, I mean me and Nick Rubenstein. He was like he did the first 3 issues. We were like inseparable in that early era, 92, 93, 94, up through 95. And then he got a job at Epitaph being the art director, and he moved to LA. And then I had a kind of a wilderness period. And then trying to find a layout guy, and then the answer was the call came out. It was Chriser, who owned Lookout, did layout, and Chris Imlay started, and I would, in one issue I might have like 3 or 4 different people doing layout, and as long as I was overseeing it, I could keep it pretty consistent looking, but that's why it had a record. And I remember I saw Gashuffer, and they did a cover of Bad Guy Reaction by the Rosillos, and I was like, oh man, I'm going to put that out. So I was going to put out a flexi disc. And then I found out the only place you can get them it's called Evatone Sound Sheets back in the day, and they were just kind of like pricks to deal with. And I was like, geez, because I thought a flexi would be good, Yeah. And then I thought, well, no, I'll do a record. And then other people who had records and zines, they had like a 45 and it was like stapled in on like a newsprint. It never worked, So I said, well, if I'm going to do a record, I'll do a sleeve. Then I'm like, well, if I'm going to do a sleeve, I got to do it in a picture sleeve with a bag. And then how's that going to attach? I'm like, I guess I'll just put it in a bag, and I'll put that in a bag. so I ended up like accruing all this extra cost, trying to protect the record, like I didn't want the record to be thought of as like a throwaway, I wanted it to have its own value. And the reason they were split singles is because Supercharger, Greg Lowry, who later did Rip Off Records, he found out that I was doing a single of Gashuffer doing Bad Guy Reaction. He said, well, we covered Mystery Action by the Rosillos. And I thought, well, that'll be great. We'll have 2 Rosillos covers on one single. And we put that out. that's how that started. And then I thought, this is good. 2 bands is good. Like, you have twice the chance of somebody picking it up because they like the band, you know? And then it was whoever I liked at the time or whoever fell into my lap. I went to a party at Anthony from the Leather Uppers house, and Clawhammer and the Red Ants were playing in his house. And I was like, you know, Clawhammer had a bunch of records out at that point, and they were on Sympathy, and I think they were just getting signed to Epitaph, and then the Red Ants, and so Terry from the Red Ants was married to John from Clawhammer, and I thought this would be cool. Like, have you guys ever done a split record together? And they're like, no. And I said, well, let's do that. And then, you know, things would just fall into my lap like that. Then I would try to tie it in. Number 3 had this massive interview with the Fastbacks where I interviewed all 13 of their ex-drummers, I think it is. And which they really liked. And the first one was Duff McKagan, you know, of course, who was in Guns N' Roses at the time. And he was the first one to return my call. He was like so excited to do an interview about being in the Fastbacks and nothing about GNR or anything. And it was ridiculous, you know. But anyway, and then they did. So they gave me this great single where they do 3 UK subs covers, where the three singers, each one sings their own song, and there's 3 different drummers. Like, they did it on purpose so it would tie in with the magazine. It was number 3, you know, with the Hot Wheels on the cover. Like, really, really, really exciting era. It's like 95, and then the Mises were like my favorite local band, and then they did that, and then we were like, well, the Fastbacks were in town, so we did a photo shoot where they're playing Monopoly against each other. Like, anything I could think of, I could do. It was just the ultimate creative outlet, you know. And then I got, you know, very proud to had Peter Bagg and Coop and Frank Kozik and, you know, Brian Clark, aka Les Toyle, and of course Robert Williams, Von Franco, Dirty Donnie, Rockin' Jelly Bean. You all did covers, you know. It's really kind of cool, you know. Like, some of the top talent, you know, contributed. They wanted to be a part of it, and then the bands came, and it's just amazing that I ended up doing Southern Culture on the Skids, and, you know, Mudhoney, the Melvins, you know, the Donnas, of course, you know, all that, and Rocket from the Crypt, and the Helicopters. It was really cool. Like, it became its own cool thing. Like, eventually people just wanted to be a part of it, you know. And a lot of people offered to do records that I couldn't, because I'm doing like 1 a year, you know, and it was hard to know who to get. But I'm really proud of it, you know. So going up from 1 to 10, so is this number 10 of your podcast?
Yeah.
That's great, because number 10 is like the Gearhead. That's the Robert Williams cover, and Rocket from the Crypt, Helicopters, you know, came out in 1999, and that was like, you know, that was like the turning point too. Then at that point it was decided to split the record, take the records out of the magazine, because at that point I'm selling like 13,000 magazines, and I'm pressing 13,000 records. Well, you don't get a price break on records. Like, if you were printing magazines and you were printing 13,000, so much of the cost was in the setup back then, and getting the you know, they had to make film, and then they had to go make plates for it was printed on a big web press. You know, just like in a movie in the 40s, like, think, like, stop the break, you know, like, you know, they show like the headline spinning and the big web press. It was exactly that. It was a giant web press. And so it occurred to me that 13,000 people probably didn't even have turntables. And I was kind of like, well, how many people aren't even hearing this record at this point? So the decision was made to split it, you know. So I was doing it for about 10 years before I started having a label, and it was then once the label started, it was very hard to do the magazine for a while, because the label took a lot of my time. So in 2000 you have no issue of Gearhead, and then in 2001 you have number 11, the bulletproof cover one that sold out. I mean, that's like, I got one out, and then there's years, and then it's you don't see it come back out until I think 05, I think is 12 finally. But, you know, we had a thing, it was a Roth tribute issue, and he died years earlier, and it took like years to get it out, and, you know, so there was a lot going on, and then you know, actually the clothing part of it was a big deal. I mean, you know, I would have, I don't know, 12, 14 designs at any given time: hoodies, hats, stickers, patches, and, you know, that's the bread and butter, really. So, you know, you had to keep up with the clothing and the records. I think in 2000, nine records came out on the Gearhead label, and then there were some years where there were 12, 13, 14, like a little more than one a month coming out, and then you're trying to do the magazine too, plus the clothing, and it got a little bit crazy there for a while, and never made enough money to like buy a car or anything,
Right.
Like there's no like, because as soon as you make some, you always owe someone. It was this weird thing, like we pulled out enough to pay the rent, and that was about it, and so there was never money in it, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to. Eventually, as you know, when we were having such a hard time, you sold like one ad for me, remember? Like nobody would buy an ad like at all. Like in 2008, it was so bad. Yeah. It was so hard. Like the big three almost went under. People forget. Like the big three almost went under. It's almost unthinkable, but it happened. And there were casualties. They killed Oldsmobile and Pontiac and Mercury, right. And there's casualties of the whole thing, and Plymouth. Like brands that were forever are gone. But everybody had to streamline and pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever. But I lost, Mopar, Harley Davidson, Cherry Bomb, Flowmaster, and there was nobody. And some tattoo parlor or barbershop, it's those ads. They couldn't buy an ad expensive enough to pay to print it. Yeah. And it was just I wanted to just like go out with dignity, but unfortunately we know that didn't happen. So I don't know how to lead into all that, but. Did I?
Yeah, I guess
well,
you picked up a partner somewhere along the way, and then
yes, in 2000, I was approached. My ex-partner Michelle, she worked at More Damn Records, and she wanted to have a record label, and she said, "I heard you want to start a label," and she was like, "If you partner with me, I already work here, and I'll have a distribution deal built in." And that's really what it was. Like her background was all in record distribution. She had never made a record or made anything, but she knew distribution. So and was willing to put up some money. Mm-hmm. So we each put in. Let me think about this. I'm gonna say we each put in $5,000. I think that's what it was. And then we started, putting out records, and so that was rolling. And the way it was she was my partner on the label, but I was still doing the merch and magazine and everything. And then years later, she was like, "If we put this all under one thing, then the money that the label's making would carry the other branches and everything." And that seemed reasonable, I guess, at the time. And I was basically, I guess what I want to say is if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is, and a lot of stuff was promised to me, and it was just, like, I won't be involved. You put out whatever you want. I'll just pay for it. And that, of course, that didn't happen. And she wanted to take more and more of a role in being involved. And I did. I was, a couple bands she liked. We actually signed 2, I think. So everything on the label, like out of all of it, certainly the Helicopters, the Hives, the New Bomb Turks, the Demons, the Dragons, the Wild Hearts were my friends. That all came from me. And she signed Red Planet and Guido Guido Hustler were the 2 that came from her. Not bad bands or anything. Just that's like the ratio of how that all worked out. And then so anyway we didn't really get along and see eye to eye. The whole thing was like a big fight the whole time anyway. And then so in 2006 we decided to split, and I was like, well, take the label and I'll take what I brought in. I'll take the magazine and I'll take the merchandise. And so from 5 more years, that's what we did. So I published, and then that's like when, so I think Gearhead 12, 13, and 14 came out during when the label was going. And then 15, the one with the choppers on the cover, is the first one that I did. 15, 16, the Jelly Bean one. 17, the one with Guido on the cover. 18 with Gambino and Roger Mayer on the cover. I put those out. That was on my era. And then we had that bad economic downturn, and and then it got really prohibitively expensive to print, and the advertising dried up. And I was going to try to do 20. That was my goal. I still have 19. I have my issue in the can of that. It's Wiesner cover. He painted a cover. I have interviews with all, and I was going to try to put it out, and it never happened. And I was going to do 20 because I thought it'd be a good bookend. like 10 with records, 10 without, and then I was just going to stop. And I figured, like, no matter how hard it is to do, I could do one more, I could, and so I was definitely ending it. I didn't lose interest in it. It didn't make sense anymore, at all. You have people who, I'm sure Kobe Gerwitz has a job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure those guys have jobs. I didn't have a job. Like, I think my biggest mistake was just trying to make a living off of it, and you can't. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in the most expensive.
We were talking about that earlier. Like, I'm 31, so my entire life you were self-employed, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, thank you. I from 18 to 48.
Yeah.
I didn't have health insurance or Social Security or nothing. Like, I had 30 solid years of doing my own thing through punk rock, playing in bands, publishing the magazine, and I did other stuff too. I wrote for Rodder's Journal. I wrote books. I wrote that book about Robert Williams. I wrote a book with Cole Foster, and which is an honor. That stuff is great. But it was doing the magazine that led to all that. I mean, if you, the few times people have ever asked me for advice or whatever, I would say, well, just do it. Do whatever it is you want to do it, because you don't know what it'll lead to. So I would start I did that. So we interview Robert Williams, for instance, and it ends up being like this epic interview to the point where motor books are saying, like, you're the expert on this guy, and Williams is going, let's get LaVella. He knows my whole thing.
Did that start from Gearhead?
Was
that the interview that turned into?
Oh, absolutely. And frankly, when I was writing the book, there were gaps. I mean, Bob is amazing. Like, you go to his house, you turn on the mic, and he goes, "Is there click? Is the ticking of that clock gonna bug you?" He has like a grandfather clock, and he stops the pendulum, so there's no noise at all. Like, you want to talk about the cleanest, interview tapes ever, And when you're working with motor books, they have transcription services. They send it off, they transcribe it. So when it comes back, of course, they don't know what you're talking about. So like the 32 Ford High Boy turns into 32 Ford Pie Boy, or so whatever they think you said, and then you have to go, oh Jesus, then you have to make all the car stuff back into what it actually is. But yeah, no, that led directly from Gearhead, and ditto the Cole thing. Interviewed Cole, and he's same. He's like, let's, but they, motor books, they took a huge hit in like 08. They used to have a thing where there was 21 feet of Barnes and Noble dedicated to car books, and it got cut to 7, which means 2/3 of that went away. They used to do 12 books a month. And then I think it got cut down to like 24 a year or something. I mean, don't quote me on that. Well, quote me, I guess I'm saying it. But it was something, it got cut so hard. Like publishing got hit so hard in that era. And then I thought, well, now what? And, and so I decided to, try to get a job. And I was basically unemployable. I mean, I think Josie's the only person who ever gave me a job. Ever, because everyone thought, well, you want to do your thing and you're never going to take any job seriously. Of course, that worked out because it was very part-time, and I think I could focus for one day on something else, which is helping some poor bastard who drove in from Vallejo get a can of pomade or whatever it was. But I really enjoyed that, and I'm very fond of your mom, as you know. I just really you guys were that was really great. Anyway, well, the whole thing with okay, so I split from the label, and then my ex-partner, she went bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And we had legal documents that said, like, that I had co-signed for loans, specifically a loan from Bank of America for $135,000 is what it was, and I had a legal document that said that we split the business, but they could care less because they have a legal document with your signature on it. So when she went bankrupt, they all came after me, and my house was under siege. I mean, I had those collectors like flashing like those 100,000 candlelight deer spotters into the windows and pounding on the door with flashlights, scaring the shit out of my neighbors. Real hassle, So anyway, I figured out, so she went bankrupt. They came after me. And I think it was $135,000 plus fees to B of A, and then I think it was $38,000 to Wells Fargo plus. So anyway, suddenly I find myself being sued for $250,000. Okay, so now I paid all my debts when we split up. I said, whatever debts are related to merchandise, so we owed Cinderblock whatever money for the last batch of shirts. I owed Lucky Mule, Courtney Callahan, one of my dearest friends. I owed him money for shirts, and he always, man, he printed for me on the worst of times. I mean, he's a goddamn saint, and I made sure he got every goddamn penny I ever owed him. I mean, we're more than square, you know, and whoever, and I paid them off. It wasn't easy. There was like labels that were made to ship, and I kept that. Like I owed Punks with Presses money. We had that one shirt that was a heat transfer, and she'd never paid that guy, so I inherited that because it was a shirt, you know, like that kind of thing. So I paid, like I worked and paid off all those debts. I was at zero. I was fine, and everything was going okay. And then I got hit with this lawsuit, and then simultaneously, like, you know, the economy, you know, so I had to go bankrupt. Even though when I went in to talk to the bankruptcy attorney, they looked at my credit score and they're like, "Why are you going bankrupt? You're fine." And I'm like, "Why? I'm not throwing good money after bad. I'm not paying these debts that aren't even my debts legally, aren't my debts." So that happened, and I didn't know the whole story at the time. I guess she lost her house and everything. Like she really, you know, she took a hit. And then I had nothing to lose. My bankruptcy was probably the easiest one ever. I don't own a home. I don't own a car. I have nothing. I have no money in the bank. I have no assets, no stocks. These underwear I'm wearing, Kathy probably bought for me in the mid-90s, you know, before 2005, certainly. You know, like I wear, you know what I mean? Like this shirt my Aunt Tootsie gave me. These shoes my friend Alexi sent me. I mean, I don't buy anything. I don't have anything. I really don't, you know. So, I mean, when people come to my house and they see, what's all this stuff? I'm like, it was all thrifted. Everything was, as you know, everything was a buck or two. You know, I've never, that's why I stopped with the tiki mugs. I bought them, I had a dollar limit for years. And then at one point I raised it as high as $5. I think the last tiki mug I bought, I paid $5 for, but it was one I really wanted. And then I'm like, I'm done with this. And then I had so many, and then, you know, some sold for $100 or more, you know, but I had all this stuff. I mean, I always had a knack for buying the right shit. I really did. I got to say, like, I was always slightly ahead of every curve and bought it, and then I always had whatever people wanted and were willing to pay for, which has sustained me. That's how I've lived, you know. And so anyway, so the bankruptcy, so I go, so then, what is it? Oh, was it? So in 2012, I really was hurting. You know, I was just like, the magazine hadn't come out since 2009. I had no, you know, whatever. I was still setting up at shows, and if I did a decent car show, I could eat that month. Like I could pay my rent and eat. But that big show at the Cow Palace that used to have, when they quit that, it killed me. Because I didn't have a show from, oh Christ, October to Paso Robles. It was brutal. That was like, the winters were so hard to get through. And I had to sell a lot of records. I mean, I used to have everything on Discord, Exclaim, Danger House. It's all gone. You know, I had to sell everything to pay the rent, you know, just to try to get by. But I was still thinking that I could turn it around, and, you know, I had a lot of faith in my own ability to keep it going. But like the world had other ideas, you know. And then getting sued like that was just so brutal. So it just forced me into bankruptcy. And then what happened was, so during this whole time, Mike's partner had applied for the trademark for Gearhead and got it. And at one point, so then I got served like, you don't own Gearhead anymore. That's what happened. So you could say it was like Machiavellian, I think. It was like her idea kind of all along. And I haven't ever gone out and told anyone not to support Gearhead. It's really, I'm sure you can imagine how conflicted I am, because it's like all that work I did on it, and it had all this goodwill, but then it had bad will too. Like I didn't, you know, I'm sure there were times where somebody ordered something that I didn't have or couldn't afford to send, or, you know, like I'm sure there was dissatisfied people, but it was all purely economic. It was just really, there was never, I mean, there's a term, severely undercapitalized, and that's exactly what I was. I was severely undercapitalized. So, you know, I was never able to like go out and get a loan or throw money at it or do anything. And, you know, I'd borrow money from people, pay them back. When it comes out, I'll pay you, blah, blah. You know, it was always that. It was such a crazy hand-to-mouth existence. And like I say, I was getting ready to wrap it up anyway. I really was. And I remember laying in bed and I had nowhere to go and no money or anything. And I remember thinking like, it would be so cool to have a job Like, it would be so cool to, like, get up and maybe, like, take a shower, shave, you know, put on some clothes, you know, and go to a job. Like, I couldn't imagine. You know, I wanted a job so bad. I really did. I'm not being cute or clever. I fantasized about being employed. I really thought it would be so cool to have a job, you know. And then I thought, well, what can I do? You know, and so I was living with my girlfriend at the time, Greta, was very supportive of all my ridiculousness for years. But I think eventually it reached a point where, I mean, she was working at Babeland, and, you know, and still is. She moved to Seattle where they have stores, and she's doing really well and everything. But it was just, you know, the relationship kind of wrapped up, but I'm sure I accelerated it by having no money ever under any circumstances, you know. But so anyway, so I decided to go to nursing school. I don't know if you remember all that.
Yeah.
I went and I went to be a CNA. My ex-wife paid for it. I was working a couple days a week for the Fuzzy Dude people, and I was taking care of Laura's mother, Mary, who had Alzheimer's. She's since passed away. And apparently I did such a good job taking care of this woman with Alzheimer's. I mean, like, she wouldn't get out of bed for anybody. I'd come, she'd jump out, get dressed, and like, your boyfriend's here, and she, ooh, you know, and she would just go anywhere. And they were kind of, I don't want to say they were overwhelmed, because they have this woman with Alzheimer's, and she wants to be with them at all times, and they're trying to run a business. My job was basically to distract her, and she liked dogs. Well, you know me and dogs, but I took her to the dog park every day. I mean, like, let's go to the dog park, and we watched dogs play. You know, it was great. So I was getting paid $8 an hour or whatever to babysit a woman with Alzheimer's at a dog park. I'm thinking, there's got to be more to life than this. I think I could probably do something better than this, you know. But anyway, that led to the idea of becoming a CNA. So this is like 2011, 2012. And so I went, and so my ex-wife, who's a nurse, who's an RN, Mara, she was like, I'll pay. She's like, how much is it? And she just paid with a credit card. I'm like, what do I owe you? I'll pay you back. She's like, forget it. You know, like, she's been working as a nurse for years. Her dad, when she moved to California, her dad bought her a house so she wouldn't have to worry about paying rent. Jesus. So yeah, so like, everybody I know, people I know fall over, if they trip backwards, they'd fall into a pile of money. I swear to God, except me. I don't know how I've avoided it all these years. My landlord, Bill Silvera, the famous Bill Silvera, once said, one of these days, you're going to wake up and you're going to be a millionaire. I don't know how, but I'm positive. So I still have that hope in the back of my, you know. It's really only through Bill's not raising my rent for 15 years that I could still live here. Yeah. He eventually had to, and I understand why. And but it's been, so of course now I'm right at whatever I get paid, pays the rent, car payment, insurance, phone, cable, and I have $100 left, $200 for food. I'm still exactly hand to mouth, but at least it's a better, much better existence. You know, it involves having a 2016 Mustang, which I bought to rebuild my credit. They say that's the best way to get your credit back score, is to make a car payment on time. So I just have it come out automatically. And I haven't checked my credit score lately, but I'm sure it's better than post-bankruptcy. You know, it's a year now. Anyway, so I was going to be a CNA, and I couldn't pass the test. They have this crazy test that's the Red Cross gives this test. There's a written test, which I killed. It's like 150 questions. I got 2 wrong. But then you have to do these skills. You have to change a bedpan and change a sheet, you know, and you have to do it with like a dummy laying in the bed. And the first time I did it, they said I didn't get the gait belt tight enough. Then the second time I did it, I took someone's pulse with my thumb, which is a no-no. You take it with your fingers, not your thumb. And I got it right, but I put my thumb. So they, you know, so I kept going. And you get 3 chances to pass this test. And I'm like, so I failed twice. And I'm like, no, like, okay, come back. We're going to work with you. And I mean, I got to say, the school was terrible. The woman who did it was never there. They were Muslims, and they were lovely people, but she was working as an RN trying to teach classes, and she'd be like, "You guys just learn amongst yourselves." Quote. You know, what does that mean? So, you know, so I wasn't really properly trained, and the fact that I couldn't pass the test bared that out. You know, it's like I did mistakes that no one ever told me not to do, and finally they were going to help me, and right then. I was at Nob Hill Foods, and I ran into Ron Amatone, and his wife Chris was a mortician. She worked at Greer Family Mortuary, and I'm talking to him. I'm like, you know, I'm trying to trying to become a nurse, but blah, blah, blah. And she's like, we're hiring right now. And so she goes, she said, here, she's like, the guy, the funeral director, his name is Ken Pierce. And I'm like, okay, well, ends up from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Freaking, I could have went in there wearing overalls, No, that's not true. But he's a nice guy, and he, I eventually sold him a car, of course. I will sell everyone a car eventually. My goal in life, everyone I've ever known will buy a car, and if they did, I'd sell a lot of cars. So anyway, Ken. So I go over there. So get this. So I have this interview for a mortuary, okay, and you have to wear a suit. Okay, the only suit I have is one that Greta helped me get for my friend Jeremy's wedding, okay, and so Jared got married, and the suit had goddamn moth holes in it, and I go to put it on, and there's holes in it, and I was like, God damn it, specifically the right sleeve had holes, so I took a Sharpie. And I blackened. I made it so like if the hole moved, it at least was black underneath. And I did the interview.
She like Sharpied all over your arm.
No. There's like a lining to the suit.
Oh, okay.
Like they ate through the black, but the lining is white, so you see these big white spots. So I blacked them out with a Sharpie. I'm like, fuck, So I go to the interview. I mean, this is like how.
That's so tacky.
This is how. Why do you know what to do? I go to the interview and I lean in right. I like lead right. I made sure he couldn't see my left arm. I sat in the chair. There were two chairs facing him, and I picked the one where it looked naturally for me to be leading, right. And I didn't want him to see that I had a big hole, Ends up he's from Pittsburgh. He's not from Pittsburgh, but he went to mortuary college in Pittsburgh. And he went there, and he knew guys. He knew a guy from Harmony who was crazy, and he was in a frat there. And, I mean, we have precious little in common, except for that he's a nice guy who gave me a job. And he wanted to pay me $10 an hour to drive a hearse. And I'm like, come on, man. I'm like, I'm 48 or whatever. I'm like, really? And he was like, well, okay, I'll make it 12. And that way you'll take home like 10. And I said, okay. I had to get paid more than Charlotte's Web to drive a hearse. I mean, I had to, right? Yeah. So I negotiated. So the best negotiation of my life, $12 an hour. I was able to negotiate. So anyway, I mean, I don't know if you know what it involves driving a hearse, but I mean, you come out of the service, and so they owned another funeral home called Grant Miller. It's on Telegraph Avenue, and so they owned two. So I would do services at both. But Grant Miller was a Chinese funeral home, so I did Chinese funerals, which was fascinating. They put out these big shrines and all this crazy stuff.
Those hell notes, right?
Yes, yeah. They line the coffin with money.
Yeah.
And if someone's young enough, they'll put real money in it. Yeah, but if they're older, there's hell money, they burn it. Well, there's a 55-gallon drum, but they don't just burn money. They have little houses, little servants, little cell phones, little cars. They have a little Mercedes. So they burn all that so the person has that in the afterlife. I mean, it was a fascinating job, but it was corporate. It was a corporate. They were owned by a corporation out of Houston. I don't know if you ever watched 6 Feet Under, but it was exactly like that. Like a corporation tries to buy the little mom and pop funeral homes. And anyway, it's interesting because my very first job, my mother worked in a funeral home in Harmony. So I worked in a funeral home when I was 8. So I'd been walking through morgues and all that. So I had worked, in a funeral home before, many years earlier as a little kid. And I would carry the flowers up after the funeral, and the funeral director, Joe Nichols, would slip me a $5, which was like so much money when you're 8 years old in 1972, 3, whatever, So anyway, so I'm working at this funeral home, and you're driving her. So after the funeral, they put the coffin in the hearse. And the Chinese funerals are really interesting. You had to back up. You had to go forward and back 3 times so the dead person knew they were dead, so they knew it was their last ride. Then they had a thing called a drive-by, where you go by their house and you open the door for exactly 45 seconds so the deceased can get whatever they need out of the house. Wow. I mean, it's like it's superstition upon superstition.
That's really intense.
Well, it's really intense, and they've been doing this for a lot longer than way before Columbus, discovered America, supposedly, before Leif Erikson was here, before anything. They've been doing these rituals. They're like this ancient culture, So, but anyway, you're in there, and usually the firstborn son rides with you in the hearse, and they have to they can't cry, and they're holding usually like a large photograph of the deceased, and they get in there with you, and you're driving, and usually they break down.
They're in the front seat with you?
They're in the front seat with you. Only one person goes with you. So you're driving, and they would break down in tears. They would just like, because they've been holding it in. Yeah. And then you're like, you couldn't talk to the guy if you wanted to. I mean, you don't know if he speaks English or not.
Right.
And so you're driving, but you're driving, there's 70 people following you. You make one wrong turn, 70 Chinese people are going the wrong way. So it's like, I mean, and I was kind of like, fuck this, like this is so much pressure for $12,
At any point, did you let's take a detour just to test this?
Oh my God, you'd be fired immediately if you did anything wrong. Because apparently there's tons of people looking for this job, apparently. Anyway,
I don't know, it sounds like a pretty sweet gig.
It was cool. The imagery was cool. What I learned about, and there was a lot of Filipino funerals at Greer Family Mortuary in Alameda. The way they would have a funeral was so completely different from this. And then I did Irish, where it's stoic, and then they have this big wake, and everybody gets drunk. And the Italian ones, they go into the church, and they actually have the pall, that they put over the the whole thing. So
the Chinese watched them get cremated, right?
I had to do witness cremations.
Yeah.
That, you know what? That was the hardest thing, a witness cremation. Because because you're there. It's usually just the parents and a son. Then they select so maybe a boy who's 30 dies, and the parents are only maybe in their 50s, and then they have a younger brother who's in his 20s, and he would press the button to fire up the the incinerator. You put him in there, and it was crazy, and they're all standing there, and they're crying, but then the dad can't cry, and the mother's and it's and you're like, God, he's burning his brother, the reality of what was happening would hit you occasionally. You had to really divorce, because you're there in a suit, you're a representative of the funeral home. You have to be the one who's and you had to herd people like cattle. They're a lot of times they're grieving, they don't know where to go. They're here, sit here, and you would just try to help people get through this crazy thing. It was but again, my personality was apparently uniquely qualified for it, just like I was supposedly uniquely qualified to take care of Alzheimer's patients and become a nurse.
Alzheimer's patients and the dead. That's who gets along well with you.
That's who gets me. So yeah, well, ex Sam Hain roadie, perfect job for next Sam Hain roadie, driving a hearse. So but anyway, so eventually there was this woman there named Jenny who ran the Chinese funeral home, and she was the cheapest. She rivaled my boss at Bay Area Records and Tapes in cheapness. Now, he died of cheapness. He just dropped dead of massive coronary because of how cheap. But she'll never die because she knows how to make money, and if she was dead, she couldn't make money. So, but anyway, she was the level of cheapness. I've never seen anything like it. To wit, she after a funeral, they walk around with incense. They walk, and you have to. They come in beating pots and pans, and so the dead person knows they're dead. And they do all, and then they walk around with all this with incense and everything, and it leaves little piles of incense all over the floor. And we had a giant Kirby vacuum cleaner from fucking 1806, this giant, and she would turn the lights off, and I'm trying to vacuum in the dark, and I'd turn the lights, she'd come in, and I'd say, hey, and she'd go, if I could see, you could see, she'd just yell at me very mean, and I was like, man, fuck this. Why am I getting yelled at by a skinny little Asian woman? I'm doing my best. I'm doing absolutely my best here, and everyone there liked me. Now, the crew in Alameda, it's fun working at a funeral home because, behind closed doors, they're laughing, they're making fun of shit. It's exactly what you would think. They have really great senses of humor and everything. I think I signed a thing where I would never speak about any of this, by the way, which, whatever. I'm not going back into that business, but anyway, so one day, so go backwards to, I told everyone in the world I knew I needed a job. I need a job. So my friend Joel Benjamin said, you should sell cars. And I went and I got an interview at Albany Ford Subaru, and they didn't hire me, but what I didn't know was 2 other people applied right before me, and they were basically, given the job. And he told me my reason for not hiring me was that I talked too much. And he said, in the car business, you have to listen. You have to listen to the person's needs, and then and he's like, you talk too much. And I said, okay, whatever. And I remember, I was working for Laura, and I was there, and I took the call, in their backyard. And I remember they're like, well, we're not going to hire you. I'm like, ugh. And then that really accelerated this idea of, trying to, go to, that's when I went to nursing school. Mm-hmm. That's when I started the funeral home. So 2012 is when I went to nursing school. Yeah. 13 is when I was working at the funeral home. That's when I was working there. But again, and also too, they have to make sure that it's part-time. How many services did you do? If I was getting close to 40 hours, they wouldn't let you do one. Mm-hmm. So if you went over 40, you could be considered full-time. They have to start giving you like benefits, which they made sure you never got. So, you know, like the most money I ever made at the funeral home was my best month. I made $800. Okay, my rent was $1,380 at the time. So it never covered my rent. So it was like a real struggle. So anyway, Joel, I went, I didn't get the job. And then I didn't apply at any other car dealership. It was really weird. I could have, I didn't. I went to nursing school, didn't get it, started driving the hearse. And like I said, there was great things about that job. There were bad things. But in reality, I didn't make anywhere near enough money to even cover my rent. So I had to do something. So now I'm getting desperate. And after the If I Could See, You Could See incident, I went out and I called Joel. I'm like, Joel, please, if there's any way they're ever hiring again. He goes, we're hiring now. He goes, if I get you an interview, you have to shut up. You have to come in here quiet, you know? So
that's when smoking pot could have helped you out,
yeah,
see?
Well, what? So I would be comatose during an interview? So I hate pot. I smoke pot. I can count on one hand, but I hate it. You know, every time I smoke pot, I hallucinated wildly. I saw crazy things. I saw the Rockettes performing in a candle. I mean, like, yeah, like real, cause imagine how pure my body is.
You were smoking the wrong kind of pot,
well, imagine
the right kind. I don't know.
Exactly. People were like, "I'd do anything to get as high as you." I'm like, it sucked. I hated it. But anyway, I hate pot. I hate it. So anyway, so I called and he got me another interview, and this time, so now I'm like between funerals, and I go up there in the flower truck for this interview, and I'm like wearing a suit and everything, and I go in. Same guy, Mike Mitchell, my mentor, brought me into the car business, really. And I just shut up. And he's like, what have you been doing? I'm like, driving a hearse. And he goes, yeah, how's that? I'm like, well, it taught me to be really quiet. I go, for long stretches of my day, I just stand there in complete silence. And he was like, You know, like, I really played it, you know, this time. And I go, and he goes, well, how is that? I go, well, you only work when there's a death. And if no one dies, I don't work, you know. I go, sometimes I have a week off. And I go, now having a week off is nice if you earned it. And he goes, ooh, I like that. You know, because in the car business, they want you to work as much as possible. You get like 1 day a week off, and and then on that day, they would be like, so you have enough money? You don't need to come in? And they would like start working on your mind. They can't sell a car unless you're there. And not every dealership is like this, I came to find out. But where I worked certainly was. They wanted you there as much as humanly possible. So anyway, so I said all the right things, and he goes, all right, I'll let you know in a week. And he goes, you know what? And I'll never forget, he goes, fuck that, you're hired. And he reached over and he hired me. So now I got to buy clothes. So when I got hired at the funeral home, I borrowed money to buy 2 suits. I went to that shitty place by the Coliseum. I got 2 suits for $138. 2 for $138. I mean, they're terrible. But I wore them, and you have to like scrub toilets in the suit and everything when you work at the funeral home. I mean, it's like you're wearing this thing under conditions where you wouldn't normally be wearing a suit. Then you got to come out fresh for the next batch of mourners coming in, you know, to see that whatever. So anyway, it was just so now I have to buy, and I have nothing. So I remember like laying out my shirts on my bed and taking pictures with my phone and sending them to Joel. And he's like, too casual. I'm like, damn it, you know, because all I had is like shirts that I got, you know, like Stop Staring, you know, not Stop Staring, but who is it? Like Rocksteady. That's all I had was like shirts where I looked like Tony Soprano or something. And apparently that wasn't right.
Like Fat Guy Vegas
Yes,
shirts.
exactly. Now, where I work now in Marin, it's fine. In fact, that's what they wear. The GM wears that stuff. So it's really relaxed where I'm at now. And you get a couple days off a week, and you can take vacation, and. So I'm finally at a place that appreciates my unique meanness, I guess. They just let me be myself, and it works very well, and nobody's busting my balls, and you know. But anyway, how I arrived there is a whole other thing. But anyway, I go to work, so I finally get some clothes, and I'm working. And I finally start, you know. So I'll never forget. I go in, they're like, hey, it's flu season. Everybody get flu shots. We can't afford to lose. You know, we have a skeleton crew. We have like maybe 4 guys on the floor at that time, and 5, I guess. And I go in and I go, I want to get a flu shot. And they're like, do you have insurance? And I go, no. And I go, wait, yes. Like it was so weird to have insurance, you know, after like decades. So I go, and I get them, they go, oh, it's free. I'm like, whoa. So I text, John, the owner. And I'm like, and he said, in 30 years, you are the first person that ever thanked me for health insurance. And I'm like, and in 30 years, I'm sure I appreciate it more than anybody else does. I also assumed that after 30 years, the day I got coverage, my appendix would burst.
Right.
I assumed it was like waiting, like, oh, finally, like I thought I was just going to go to hell immediately, but if I'm thankful for anything, I'm thankful for a lot of things, but my health it's just been incredible. I've never been sick. I've never broken a bone. I've never had a stitch. I've never been to an emergency room, and I've never spent a minute in the hospital.
Why are you saying all of this?
Because,
the minute you leave, you're going to get into like a giant car crash or something.
Well, because I've been saying this for 20 plus years, and I don't believe in jinxes. I'm just saying.
Like you're testing the universe.
What? When I do, it's going to be like, finally, something happened to this guy. It's crazy. I've just been. It's remarkable, right? To get that far along with. Not one stitch.
Yeah, you're due.
Yeah, I'm due for a complete breakdown. I'm due to be full of cancer and have 2 weeks left. I know it, but it's so far so good. Anywho, so I get the job. So I'm working. I start selling cars, and slowly. But I was happy. Like every day when I got up, looking at my 3 shirts that I could wear and smelling it and which one smells the least, and trying to, trying them on my own, trying to make it, and I was so thankful, and anyway, it ends up being a car salesman is probably what I should have done all along. I kind of avoided it as a kid. My bunch of my relatives were car salesmen. My cousin Johnny Noretto has a famous Buick dealership in Western Pennsylvania. John Noretto Buick, and my cousin Larry worked at Hamilton Buick Pontiac, and then, my Uncle Joe sold RVs for a while. I have all this family in car sales, and I could have gone into it. I could have, at age 18, like when I graduated at 17, I could have become a car salesman then. I can't imagine where I would be or what I would surely own a home, and, if I started paying a mortgage 30 some years ago, who knows? I would have whatever. But I would have never come to California. Never done Gearhead. I would have never met, you name it, Tim Yohannan, Robert Williams, whoever. So like that was that's just the way I went. But the car sales thing suits me. It does. I think a lot of people in sales despise the human race, and there's just a very thin layer of civility between you and their complete contempt for mankind. I actually love people, as you both know. I really like people. I can get along with just about anybody. When somebody comes in who's like, and they're like an angry, person. Mike, my old boss, my old manager said, you represent every bad experience the person ever had buying a car when they walk in. So, a lot of times the first 10 minutes is just diffusing the person. They're angry when they come in. They're mad about a 74 Pontiac that they had that had a leaky roof. They're mad at you, and you have to like overcome that, and so usually with a combination of, I hope, product knowledge and expertise / humor, and well, what Mike said, the best compliment I ever got was, he said, I can teach you how to sell cars, but I can't teach personality. And he said, and you have the best personality I've ever seen. So that's a hell of a thing to say. And he really did, and he spent time with me. Like, he really sat down, like, this is how a lease works. This is because I never owned a car in my life. I owned cars that were 30 years old or whatever, and you save up for years to buy a $2,000 whatever, or what have you. But I only really owned a handful of cars. I had my '68 Dodge Charger. I paid $2,000 for it. I got $13,000 for it. I put nothing in it. I had to sell it. I made $11,000 and for nothing. It's just, they appreciated. If I could go back in time to the '90s, I'd buy up muscle cars and Nirvana records. But if I went back to the '80s, I'd buy up punk records, Misfits records, specifically, whatever. So, but anyway, so, it suits me, and I'm doing that now. And so I'm not legally allowed to be Gearhead. Mm-hmm. If people contact me, if I still have some stuff, I may or may not, but I still, I'm of course, I'm really proud of it. I am looking for the next thing. I had to cool out after I left the label. I didn't go to a show for like some years. There was about a 3-year period where I only went to I think 4 shows. One of them was Bortzman Nortz. My cousin Jamin was playing in this weird new wave band. He was playing a theremin, you know. And I went to see them, and then I went to see Roger Merritt because I was interviewing him. But that was it. I mean, I can count on one hand how many shows I saw in like a 4-year period. But it got so weird. You know, when you have a label and you have success, people, you know, I got laid. I mean, I got laid. Like, I had sex with someone who was trying to get on the label. I mean, like, it was that. It's like, I will have sex with you right now. Like, okay. You know, like, yes, you will, you know, or whatever. I mean, it was like, it was weird. Like, you wouldn't believe the stuff that gets thrown at you. And especially, like, you know, my association with the Hives and everything, they became very successful. They were very good friends of mine. I guess we're still friends. If we talked, if I ran into them, every subsequent time I've seen them, it was very friendly, but I don't really pursue that. But anyway, it got to be this weird thing where, like, hey, Mike, my cousin is getting really good on the clarinet. Can you get him in the Hives? You know, like, or whatever. Just weird shit. And then
people wanted shit from
you.
You.
Constantly. They wanted stuff. And then, you know, people were like, oh, here, my dad. And I'm like, I can't, you know, I don't know that, you know, and people would, and then you could see disappointment on people's face. And especially when I got out of the business, they're like, oh, like, you know, I thought this was it. You were going to, you know, you were going to be, me knowing you was going to be my ticket to whatever. And it's like, I'm no one's ticket to anything. Believe me, you know, someone's ticket to fucking nut house. It's probably about it, whoever I was going out with at the time. I never, you know, so it was really weird. Like, I think people think that I had a more influence than I actually had. I mean, I've been lucky. You know, people liked me for whatever reason and wanted to work with me. I mentioned the artists that did covers for Gearhead, and not just covers, everything, the record sleeves, and then, you know, photographers, talented writers, you know, like David Featherston, people like that, like writing and not, you know, don't worry about paying me. Like, that's unheard of when you're making a living as an automotive journalist. But the Gearhead had so much goodwill at one time, and everybody, just all the most talented, seriously, photographers, writers, artists, they wanted to contribute, they wanted to be a part of it. I remember when I finally interviewed Cole, he was like, you know, don't you remember when I got introduced to you and I really wanted to be in Gearhead and you didn't? And he was kind of like, and I'm like, well, we'll make up for it. And we did, you know, and he was on the cover. Then we wrote it, you know, we did the book, the Salinas Boys book, you know, and it was great. So, you know, I made up for it. But he actually was like, oh, I really wanted to be in here. You know, it was so cool. And I'm like, wow. So, you know, so anyway, all that goodwill and everything. So I'm very thankful for that. The other thing I'm thankful for, besides my health, is that I never let not making money stop me from doing anything. And Gearhead took me all around the world. It really did. You know, I got flown to Sweden to be best man in a guy's wedding, you know, Jokia from the Nomads, to be, you know, because, like, the Gearhead guy is going to be my best man. Like, that it had, like, that much cachet at one time that it actually took me. And then they did Gearfest, and then 2 years later we added Finland. Then 2 years after that we added Norway, and then I did one in Austin at Emo's, and you know, I was doing like a rock festival in 4 countries at one point. I mean, it's crazy, and all this it's just me parlaying that whatever meanness there was. There was no payoff for anybody. There wasn't any. It's just like, let's create this thing. We'll do this thing. It'll be really cool. And what I negotiated on Gearfest was to make the salary of one of the bands. So whatever was there, if there were 10 bands, say there were 10 bands and they made $10,000 and everybody got $1,000, like that. I negotiated, like, just pay me like I'm a band and I'll put it together. And so I think that was, you know, they certainly were happy with that or whatever. And, you know, and I once went to Europe with $11. I had $11, but I had a duffel bag full of Gearhead shirts, and I came back with 1,100. I remember that specifically. I remember counting it when I got home. So it's, you know, like, I could trust that, you know, if I go there, I'll sell, everybody will want this stuff, they'll buy it, I'll come back with it. And it is interesting. So I didn't let, it took me all around the world, and I didn't let not having money stop me. That's like the biggest thing. People always wait their whole lives till they have enough money to do something. And I would, why? You know, and, you know, people pay into retirement and they, you know, I'm going to retire and then it's going to be, well, but isn't it better to live hard when you're at your youngest? Right. Isn't it better to, from 18 to 40 to 50, like, I did everything I wanted in those years. And you know, from playing in bands to touring to being a tour manager to putting out records, whatever I did whatever I wanted for 30 years. And people always say, well, you had a good run, you know? And what am I doing now? It's not horrible. I just have a job. I don't feel like a schmuck. I don't feel like some jerk getting up and going to work. I like it. I go in, people come in, you talk to them, you help people get a car. Sometimes it's a young couple who they're having a baby, so they want to get they need a new safe car, or it's an older person that they're driving some 20-year-old piece of shit and they didn't think they were going to live this long, but if they're still alive, they need a car. I know how to handle everybody. If they're young, it's it's all optimism, and you talk about safety. If they're old, you tell a couple funny funeral home stories, roll with that, or whatever. That's like the weirdest thing I always hear, like, this is going to be my last car, so it's got to be I need a good deal. I'm like, and I would immediately say, like, actually, if it's your last car, you don't need any deal at all. Who cares? It's your last car. You already have a foot in the grave. And then they laugh. I mean, I'll say, like, it took me years in the business to not filter my personality at all, but it's really working to my advantage now. I'm just me. And a lot of times people will come in, they'll be like, man, I'm glad I got you. I'm glad I specifically got you. So you just make this connection. And you have to, if someone's spending $30,000, I mean, it wasn't too long ago that would buy you like a pretty nice house, or would be a hell of a down payment on a really good house, or whatever it is. And they're spending 30 grand and they need to trust you, so I'm glad that, it suits me. Also, it's a job I can do for the rest of my life. All I have to do is stand up when the person walks in, and then walk over to a car and show it, like, like I'm on Price is Right or something. And you walk around and you do a test drive, and they sit down, then they buy, then you deliver it, you go over the books, you show them, you pair their phone, you show them how to work their car. And then I can't tell you how many people have said to me, like, can I hug you? And I'll go, as far as I know, there's no law in the books in the state of California about hugging a salesman. And I'll hug them, or it'll be like, and a couple of women have laid kisses on me, like legitimate, like, kisses, like they're just really like, I'm so happy I bought a car from you, and that's great. I mean, so it's super rewarding, and I certainly make enough now. Could I work harder and make more? Absolutely, but I won't do anything they call that getting kinky in the car business, like, or they call you a kink, like you'll do something, or I mean, there were times you could take advantage of an older person, or you could, and I won't do it. I just won't do it. Like everything I do, I bring the same integrity to car sales as I brought to punk rock, to Gearhead, to everything I do. And it's probably in some ways detrimental monetarily, but I don't care. That's how it is. Like, like the angel and devil on your shoulder. I always have Ian MacKay in one ear and Tim Yohannan in the other. Like, so I mean, like whatever I'm doing, that's always going to temper. I don't know. I mean, you get up, you go to work, it feels good. Some days you sell a car, some days you don't. But I never feel like I'm wasting my time, Yeah. And then when I come home, I'm not tired, I'm not beat. I didn't, like, in Pittsburgh, I painted houses, I hung drywall, I put shakes on houses, I was up on scaffolding. When I worked in restaurants, I emptied grease fryers and whatever, like, just, I've had those jobs where, you really, so I'm in something that I think I can do. The other thing I thought I would be good at maybe was becoming like a psychiatrist. Like, I thought that would be good, but I guess I talk too much.
Yeah, I don't know. You wouldn't shut the fuck up.
Well, not so much a psychiatrist as a psychologist, like just someone who, like someone who talks to troubled youth or whatever. Kids come in and like, my parents don't understand me. I'm pumped. Well, I can tell you all about not being understood. Or whatever, and trying to help people. I wanted to do that. I wanted to, like, Big Brother, mentor kids or whatever. I had this romantic idea that I would be good at that. And that also requires sitting down, which I like, which I'm very fond of, like not having to do anything too manual. But so does car sales. So, like, at least I'm in something. So, I mean, I don't know. I do want to do something again. Like, circling back to that, I wanted to get the bad taste of that out of my mouth, where everybody wanted to... Do you think
you would do another magazine?
No, God, no. Why?
No, God. You don't got to tell me. That medium's dead.
But when it's not only is it dead, but I did a really good magazine. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like, gee, if I only, would have... whatever.
It's not completely dead.
I don't have the magazines. I mean, maybe it'll come. Well, there's retro everything. Look how records came roaring back.
Yeah.
Vinyl records came roaring back. I've been more tempted to start putting out records again than I have been publishing a magazine. Start a little label, maybe, or something like that. But what I really want to do is a podcast, actually. Yeah. And you offered to help me, and my friend Spar offered to help me, and I now I have more time. When I was working in Albany, I mean, my one day, maybe a week off, didn't cut it. And we worked longer hours, and I was there much later. I started earlier, I worked later. I worked 63 hours a week on the clock, and plus. And I really didn't feel like, when you first approached me, I didn't think, now I certainly have more time. And I could do it, and I would love to. I mean, I really, when I think about who I could get, it's kind of remarkable. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's no one in the punk scene that, you know, I know kind of everybody, and you know, I would love to sit down and talk to Bob Mould and, you know, everybody that, you know, and Glenn Danzig and everybody. I mean, I know they'll take my phone calls. I have their numbers. I have Billy Gibbons' number. Yeah. I could call whoever. I mean, and then the car guys too. That's the other thing. And, you know, the car thing, I mean, you're covering it. You're doing a great job. It's really, everybody that you've talked to is, I think, particularly creative, and it's great that you're doing it. And I definitely want to, you know, link your thing to, I'll start working, because your social media is iffy at best.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to, and so, I mean, I have like 2,000 friends who are just waiting for me to do something on Facebook. So I'll make sure that everyone knows about this. Hopefully they'll check out the other 9 podcasts, sure. and if I can, obviously, if I can help you in any way, I will.
Yeah, and likewise, like if I figured out the mechanics of getting a podcast together, so if you want help getting something off the ground.
Well, it famously took me 2 years to figure out how to put out Gearhead 1, because I couldn't figure out how to publish a magazine. I just the layout, everything about it, the layout, the print, the how do you do it? How do you know? And I did it.
You need to recenter yourself.
What does that mean?
He had questions he wanted to ask you.
Oh, go ahead. Anyway, that's I was trying to give you a nice hour-longish encapsulation, which I think I did.
It's great. Yeah. No. So this is basically what I wanted to talk about. So.
Well, I've been interviewed before where they ask the first question and no other question.
Yeah.
So.
But I know all of these things.
Yeah. What do you want to know? Go ahead. Hit me up.
One thing that was on my mind.
Open book.
Yeah, since Gearhead started in the early 90s and continued through the mid-2000s, car culture changed so much during that.
Yes.
Like, it went from being, like, our little corner of this thing, like, apologetically led into shows at the beginning.
Yes.
And then going on a huge, like, Bulletproof even is
sure
turned into such a huge thing.
Well, yeah, and I went to the first 18 Bulletproofs. I watched the whole thing happen. But
you missed this year.
I missed last year, too, on purpose. I just decided to stop. You know, I made the decision to not go. Actually, it was hard, but I did it. I wanted to. I just wanted to. I don't know. I in the same way I was distanced. I just wanted to. I don't know. I didn't want to be. I don't want to be anywhere where everyone thinks I'm going to be.
You needed a siesta.
It's kind of a weird thing. But anyway, apologies to whoever missed me there. But the whole thing is, when we started. I remember going to Sears Point, and I had Gearhead number 1s, and I handed them to people, and they handed them back to me. Yeah. They were like, "Ew," like they were, you know, like, because it was like black and white and weird, and what is this? Meanwhile, it looked like Carcraft from '63, which is what's radder than that. I mean, design probably peaked in the, if not the late '50s, certainly the early '60s, and you know, like all that stuff is so cool. That was my mission statement. My mission statement with Gearhead was to reintroduce all that stuff back into our culture. Yeah. And I took it upon myself to do that. And like I said, you know, I noticed Ratfink stickers here and this, and I thought, you know, these bands are into this stuff. There's an audience for this. If I can take my love for cars and rock and roll and art and all the related culture and make a magazine, and no one did that. I mean, no one did. And
and this was before Juxtapose, before...
Yeah, it predates all that. Speed Kills was out. I interviewed Gassuffer before he did on the same tour. We kind of were around the same time, and I wrote for him and he wrote for me, but he stopped after 7 issues. And I kept going for, you know, that many more years or whatever. But I mean, there were detours too. I worked for Frank Kozik. I worked at Man's Room and Records. I worked at a record label, and I got Cayuse to his label and all that. And I set a lot of people up with a lot of people. I mean, there was a lot of like. Brett Gerwitz called me, "Who's your favorite band?" Gassuffer. Then he signed them. I mean, that was me, you know, and them being great. I mean, not to take away from them, of course, but you know, I'm just saying, like I put the name Gassuffer into his head. I'm like, they're the best band right now, or whatever it is. And I've helped I've helped people so many, just making connections. Like, you should know this guy, then things would happen and this and that. But vis-a-vis, back to your question, it was ridiculous. We went to this in 1991 or whatever it was, 90. We went to it was a Rod Powell Flame picnic, and it was down in it wasn't in Salinas, but it was down there somewhere, and that's where I met Cole. And I think about that now. We were 25. And he showed up with they had those suede cars and primer, and it was like everyone's like, what the, and everyone's like, when are you gonna paint those? What's going on here? Where so it was like we were the super weirdos, and I met him then, and I was just like, wow, and then you would go to like Paso, and they would be playing like, they weren't even playing like the Beach Boys, they were playing like Theme from a Summer Place, like dun 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 dun. I'm like, it was like walking into like it was like a dream sequence of what was supposed to be happening. And there's like that gazebo, and they're playing like this lovely music, and everyone has these, and then when we showed up, it must have looked like the gates of hell opened up, when they came in with the rust and the primer and and I watched the whole thing happen. I mean, and documented, I was the first person ever to cover Bulletproof and all that, and subsequent other shows. And I was very into the Asphalt Invitational, the Primer National, all those little shows. I loved them. And I supported them as hard as I could and donated stuff. And I loved the whole culture, and I watched the whole thing happen. And I remember one time I was at a Poor Boys show, and they were on their, I don't know, 5th or 6th venue that they'd been kicked out of, and we were somewhere at some hotel or something, and I don't know where the hell, we're somewhere in Sacramento, and we're there, and I remember I'm standing there, and I have a beer. Somebody gave me a lukewarm Pabst or whatever, and I'm standing there, and they're playing the UK subs over the loudspeaker over the entire ground, and everyone there is walking around. They all look like they just saw Social Distortion last night or whatever. Everybody's got, the guys have pompadours, the girls are wearing, dolled up. Everyone looks cool. Even the older people are like, they kind of got the clue a little. All that. When I started, it was all neon. Remember the neon era? Like the shirts had like neon in them, like drag races with like pink and powder blue and like green neon. It was so bad. There was no, like, style was at an absolute low point, And that's why I think Kirk Jones got hired to work at the Good Guys. They were like, make this relevant. And when he had been laying out, he was one of the many, many people who laid out Gearhead. He laid out Gearhead 9. He and Todd Westover, who at the time was the Drag Racing Monthly. And we did it in a weekend. Drove to LA and we laid out that whole issue in 2 days. It's pretty remarkable. But Kirk Jones is a huge talent. He's just like this remarkably talented person. And I just really have always really liked him. And, we just got along really well. And he and Jay Ward started Bulletproof, and I loved the idea. I'm like, a car show that starts at noon, perfect. Because it was all that lining up at 6. And of course, I'm sure it eventually became that, But
Midnight Mass was like that too.
Right.
Like
Midnight Mass was so punk rock. It was preposterous. Yeah. And, poor Daryl, like, no burnouts, like, and everybody burning. And so they lose the venue and they burn. But I'll never forget, like, what do you call it, like a catharsis, like a moment. And I'm standing there, and it's like the UK subs are playing, like, and it was that guy Richie. They hired a DJ, I remember, and I'm standing there, and I'm just like, and really, this would have been like what, 2000. I don't know. It was maybe like the 3rd or 4th Midnight Mass, and so it wasn't that far into it. What are they up to now? I don't know. Okay, so they. Well, anyway, the point is, like, it wasn't that long.
Yeah.
Maybe like 2004.
Yeah, probably. So like, really. It's only 12 years, maybe?
Because we went to the first one together.
I want to say 12 years. It would be clever to say it happened in a decade and 10. It was probably more like 12 or 13 or 14 years, but it became like totally punk rock. And I remember thinking, like, I remember going to car shows and like they would be playing like, the Beach Boys or Chuck Berry or whatever. And I'm like, that's fine, but you could play the Stooges and the MC5. Right. Why couldn't you? We're looking at muscle cars from Detroit from the late 60s. Why couldn't you play, And then I remember, like, one time going to SEMA, and there was, like, Mopar Alley, and there was, like, this, it connected to the buildings, and you walk through, and they my friend John Clark, he invited people with muscle cars out, and they were. And it was his iPod, and they were playing the Stooges. Awesome. And I was like, okay, finally, we're at SEMA, and they're playing the Stooges, and we're looking at muscle cars. Like, it happened. Like, my vision, my idea happened. I actually was there to, and I'm like, and of course I was like, whose iPod? And he's like, mine. I'm like, well, of course it is. You know, like, of course I know the guy responsible for playing the music, and he's playing like the Dirt Bombs. I'm like, this is perfect. This is perfect. Like, finally. So I feel vindicated. Like, whatever I set out to do, to just try to save that culture and what was good about it, and the garage is the whole thing. It's like the garage band, the garage built, like, and that's the thing. Like, preserve that culture. I mean, it's been said that in the '60s, on every block you could hear a band playing in somebody's garage, and they pushed the whatever car they were working out to play. It's like that whole. I used to think about that all the time. Like, like Paul Revere and the Raiders played at a drag strip, to promote like a GTO. Like, it blows my mind. Like, the stuff that happened in the '60s that people, I despise the montage of the '60s where it's like guys running through the jungle in Vietnam and they're playing, the tired, like Jefferson Airplane or whatever, like the most cliched, or like they show the dead and like people twirling around in a circle and falling down in Golden Gate Park or something. The '60s was Playboy clubs and all. It was that's why Mad Men was. I loved it because I'm like, at least they're showing like the other, all these other things in the culture. But it was like there was all this cool stuff going on, and I was like, no one's gonna preserve this. And the I love how people started fetishizing the actual Survivor cars, and they're like, this was in Hot Rod in 1950. It was my uncle's. Here it is. Like, yes, because, that Brizio era, no offense to them, but, it was, they messed up a lot of perfectly good cars, turning them into, you know what I mean? And then they reproed everything, and then you have the not real, roadsters and all that. I mean, you have, so, like this idea, Robert Williams, is famously, it's in primer, I'm done. And then all the choppers and those guys, and they were like, yes. And so it was happening in a couple different places, but I was there to see it all, document it all. And in the end, yeah, you're right. It's like this huge thing. I think the principal people all know who I am. I think that I'm not like a, it's not like I got no accolades ever or anything. I certainly don't feel that way. I feel blessed, if anything, that I've been able to spend time with. I mean, I was just thinking about, Barris it's been a year now, and, we lost Bill Hines, and, and all, and I'm so glad I got to interview these people, talk to these people, like I was there for that. And they're really, they're like the most heroic post-World War II people, that came out of it and did all these things. And then, lakes bed racing and just all that stuff. And I'm so glad I came to California. I could never afford to live here, and I really still can't. If I sold cars, I'd make the same money anywhere. If I was in Iowa, I could have some rad mansion or something, I'm sure, probably. But then I'd be in Iowa. So I basically sacrificed whatever so I could stay here, to be where the culture is. And yes, I watched it grow. And yes, if I had anything to do with it, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of whatever contributions I made to that culture. I'm very proud of it. But it seems fine now. It's I don't know, I mean, I don't know, people always complain to me about old school rods and all that, and it's it doesn't have content, but I mean, I knew eventually somebody who had money, who had like an advertising budget and a staff, would come along and put music and cars and some art into a magazine. It's a good idea. I hope it's not the only good idea I ever have in my life, but it's still it goes on its own. It goes on and on and on, and it will go on and on and on. And like I say, if I had anything to do with it, great. But yeah, I did watch it. I watched it go from fetus to, getting signed to the NBA or whatever. Like whatever's the proudest moment of a parent's life. I'm good.
Yeah, keep talking.
I'll answer anything.
We're at like an hour 40. I'm gonna hit pause on it just to make sure it saves it. And
yeah. Is that it? To turn it on?
That's it. One button.
Wow.
Could be easier. Hey, so we had a break in the recording here, and I thought it would be a cool opportunity to play some of the music we've been talking about in the interview. This song's by Real Enemy, which was Mike's first band in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's first hardcore band. It's off their tape they recorded in 1983 on Mind Cure Records, which, as we talked about in the interview, has actually been repressed on vinyl by the current owner of Mind Cure Records. So if you like it, it's out there, and I think it's a great album. It's some great early hardcore. So here's 30 seconds of it. Stay Aware off Life with the Enemy from 1983. Mike's first band, Real Enemy.
Okay, so you asked me what?
Well, that was not natural.
Well, the microphone...
How did we get there?
The microphone was off for a brief period of time, during which time you asked me, what did I want to be when I was a little kid? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think that's how you phrased it.
Yes, yeah. Because you were talking about, I don't know, being a little kid.
Well, yeah, no, and... Well, I remember this very distinctly. I wanted to be a lollipop maker. And I just decided that... And I remember everyone was like, really not supportive of that idea.
That's so mean.
Yeah, like I grew up in a house filled with adults. I mean, I'm a bastard. You know, my mom she had me totally out of wedlock. She had my sister 2 years earlier, and they sent her to Catholic Charities with the nuns, like in the John Waters movie where nuns are, we're going on a hayride at midnight and it's raining and all this, and then they take the baby from you. You don't get this. It's really traumatic. Anyway, it ended up being my sister Carol. When I turned 30, she came looking for us, and then I went to meet her. So I met my sister when I turned 30, wow. And then I met another sister when I turned 50. so yeah, my father now, my mom and my dad, my actual paternal, my father, biological father, he and my mother never dated. It was the one night they met in a bar, and that's it. And so, like, she never went out with the guy, nothing, So she knew precious little about him. I grew up, until I was 50, I only knew half of my nationality. So my mom is half Croatian and half Italian. So I knew I was a quarter Crow, quarter Italian. My last name, LaVella, is my mother's maiden name. She was never married until 1975. She married Bob Anderson, who was a trucker, who used to take me with him in the truck, which is why I saw 40 states by the time I was 10 years old. Okay, so... which was and I was going around in the truck at the height of trucking. It was the mid 70s. It was Moving On, Smoking the Bandit, BJ and the Bear, and I was in a truck, talking on a CB. So I was living it. But previous to that, it was just me and my mom. And she I was raised in a house of adults. So when I grew up, it was my mom and her identical twin, my Aunt Janet, my Aunt Tootsie, and my grandfather, Tony LaVella. And we lived together, and my mom said the biggest mistake she ever made was, she goes, when you would talk, we would all shut up. We would just listen to you talk. And so I thought I was like a little man, I was very precocious.
You were the center of the...
Yeah, well, it was a novelty. They were all living there, and all of a sudden there's this little kid.
They were probably all a little drunk, too.
Well, maybe. My grandfather made wine, he did. He had a cellar in the house he owned next door, and he converted it into, he made wine. Dago Red, But I don't know if they were drunk, but they were bored, probably, more than anything, in harmony. But, it was really interesting because, my Aunt Janet loved the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and my Aunt Tootsie was Motown, and she was Stax Records. I mean, she gave me records all Stax, Volt, Filet of Soul, like this great soul record. Those Northern Soul kids would kill, just to get a hold of these records that I just inherited, But I grew up with that. Then my cousin Mary Frances, my Aunt Liz, lived across the street, and my cousin Mary is 10 years older than me, and she was like a teeny bopper. She liked the Monkees, and then my grandfather listened to the Mills Brothers and Louis Prima, but jazz, and my Uncle Bobby listened to like jazz, real jazz, and introduced me to Sonny Clark and all that kind of, and cool stuff, Jimmy Smith, like organ record, just cool. So I was bombarded with and because we're Croatian, polkas on weekends. We listened to polkas and waltzes, and by the time I was 3, I could tell you the difference between a Polish polka, a Croatian polka, or Slovenian, actually. They're not Croatian, they're technically Slovenian. And I could tell the difference and all that. And so I grew up with all this music and everything, and I was introduced into that, which was great. But again, when I talked, they would apparently listen to me, and apparently my opinions had some weight or validity, and But I had this idea to be a lollipop maker. I don't know why. And I was like, and I'm going to give them to the kids. And I think I just wanted a lollipop so goddamn bad that I thought when I get older, I'm going to make lollipops. But, you know,
you'll never run out.
To their credit, they were like, and how are you going to sell them? How are you going to market them? How are you going to, if you give them away, you won't make money. How are you going to make a living? And I was like, you know, like, so, and then I decided I want to be an artist. And then I was always drawing and everything. And, you know, and so I wanted to be an artist, and I was very mediocre. I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, who will take, if you have a pulse, they'll take you, you know. And I went to, we used to call it 13th grade or high school with ashtrays. It was like the worst, you know. And I went there, and you know, I got there. I went for a semester, and then I moved to Pittsburgh. The first semester in 1982, I graduated in 82, and then I commuted in with my friend Matt Gaffney. He drove in. He had a Pinto, and we went every day. And he had like 2 tapes. He had like Crass and the Rosillos. It was like one or the other. And we would, you know, we're like super punk rock, and we're going to art school, and you know.
Was this post Real Enemy?
Pre 82. So in 83, I moved to Pittsburgh, and I moved in with these 2 guys who like ate all my food and ran out my phone bill, and I moved into Hell House, and then Real Enemy started in March of 83. And that's when I, you know, so I started playing. Like as soon as I got to Pittsburgh, within 3 months I was in a band, and further a hardcore punk band, which had never existed in Pittsburgh before. But anyway, I was going to art school, and then I was missing class because would go to play at CBGB's, would go to play at the Pop Shop in Cleveland. Would leave a day early. I'd miss class, and I got behind, you know. So I went to vocational technical school from 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I went for commercial art, and I went half a day to Central Westmoreland area vocational technical school. And what was good about that is there's only a couple of kids from my school going. There's me and David Yurkovich, Kim Somerville, and that we were the 3 from York. And then all the other schools, Hempfield, Norwin, Penn Trafford, they all sent their kids. And some of those kids were like kind of arty and new wavy, and it was good for me because my school was hillbilly. I mean, my class, my graduating class, in senior year in 81, the Outlaws came. There was 269 kids in my graduating class, and they had a tour. The Outlaws had this tour called Ghost Riders in the Sky, or Grits, Grits. They all did shirts like Grits, Outlaws. And I remember counting the day after the concert, 150 kids of my graduating class were wearing Outlaws t-shirts. So more than half of my graduating class went to see the Outlaws. Now I was going to see Frank Zappa and Devo. And the Pretenders, and you know, man, there was a target on my back, and I got beat up like real bad. I got beat up so bad that I got expelled from school because I was walking down the hall bloody, and they were like, who'd you fight? And I'm like, I ain't telling you, you know. And so they kicked me out because I didn't give it up. But then I went and I told the guy, like, I got kicked out for 3 days, but I didn't give you up, and we shook hands, and then I kind of got the respect because I didn't rat the guy out, you know. It was like that code, you know, the high school street code, whatever the hell the code, you know. So, but anyway, yeah, I got beat up. A kid, they found out that I saw Devo, and they put snuff out of my hair. They just took a big Copenhagen sheet and just put it in my hair. And the kid who did it was in 10th grade, and I was a senior. I'm like, I can't let this go, you know? So I took a swing at him. He came up a flight of stairs. I punched him, and I knocked him down a flight of stairs. He rolled down a flight of stairs, and he was laying there for a minute. It looked like a swastika. He just laid out. I thought everything was broken. I'm like, he's dead. Kid gets up, goes, you go, dude, and he runs up the stairs and beats the hell out of me. I think part of the reason I got my ass kicked was I was shocked that he wasn't dead, you know. But this is how tough the kids were where I grew up. They're all farm kids, you know. I often think about World War II. I often think about, like, you know, the Allies invade, and you know, England, and they're starving them out, and you know, they're having the air raids and all that. When we showed up, and by we I mean Americans, and many a LaVella, my Uncle Louie, my Uncle Duke, my Uncle Bump, they all went. They all fought in the war. Everybody but my grandfather, he didn't go because he had 4 children already. And that's the only reason he didn't go into World War II. But my uncles all went, and they all had these stories about how, you know, by the time they hit the beach, guys didn't want to fight. They went to Italy. Guys were like, Paisan. And then they would meet in the middle of the battlefield, and show each other pictures of their children, like Quanti Fili, like I have my kids, I don't want to fight you. I mean, they were done, especially in Italy. But I always think about it, when I'm just thinking when the Americans got off the planes, we must have looked like sides of beef. There's these guys from Nebraska. Think about it. You're working on a farm your whole life. You're eating good. You're out in the sun. The British are pale and pasty with bad teeth. And here we come, like, no wonder, No wonder that intimidated the Nazis and everybody. We must have looked like, you know what I mean? Like just the average man in the 40s was fit and athletic, and they bowled or they played for the Elks Lodge baseball team.
In the back of the comic books.
Yeah. Charles Atlas.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I often think about that. But anyway, that's kind of the environment I grew up in. Those kids were big and dumb and scary. Kids drove tractors to school. I mean, really, you want to talk about like the FFA, Future Farmers of America, the 4-H Club. I mean, there was this I come from such a rural, agricultural. Now, 35 minutes away is Pittsburgh, PA. 35 minutes away is Heinz Hall and Carnegie Mellon University and museums and culture. But where we're at, we may as well have been in.
So how do you find punk out in?
Oh, that's interesting. I did. Here's how I found punk. I found punk through Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
That's how I came to punk. Frank Zappa was big enough. Like, he was on Saturday Night Live, and he was on Mike Douglas. Actually, he was there. He was around. My cousin Jimmy Ally looked exactly like Frank Zappa. It was crazy. And he played it up really hard. He had the mustache with the goatee, kept his hair like Frank, everything. He was a fucking dead ringer for Frank Zappa. It was crazy. And he was older. Now, he was like my mother's age, or maybe even a little older than my mom. But he coached kids. He had a baseball team, the Glassport Frogs by name. And he was like, and we would go. And so we went to this one wedding, and me and my cousin Beto, my Uncle Bobby's son, who I grew up with, he's like a brother to me, still is. We went to this wedding, and we ran into my cousin Jimmy, and he was like, we're like, wow, who's this guy? He's crazy, and we went out to his car, and he had his Cadillac, and it was crazy. He had like this, and he would drive these kids, and he was like, hey, we go to Penguins games, we go to, and we would start, and because he was our older cousin, our parents let us go to his house. Now, what they didn't know was we could drink all the beer we want. I mean, it was like he was the worst possible influence on us. But he was a good guy. But he didn't give a shit what kids did. He was and further he was the coach of the baseball team, and all these kids would come in his house and drink, and who knows whatever was going on there, But he showed us porno movies with the guys with like the sock holders. He had like those shitty 8mm loops. He showed us porno. But anyway, but in his record collection he had Zappa records, and we started listening to Zappa, and he had 8 tracks, and we would drive around his Cadillac and we would listen to Frank Zappa, and I really got into Frank Zappa. So I called National Record Mart in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, to see if they have Frank Zappa records, and the guy who answered goes, you should talk to Jason. He's the Zappa guy. Jason Pettigrew, now senior editor of Alternative Press. Okay?
Huh.
Just by luck.
And how old were you when all this is happening?
15. So just by luck, Jason he's like 17, and he's working. He's the manager of National Record Mart. And I go, hey, what Zappa record has Cosmic Debris? He goes, oh, Apostrophe, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, we have a copy here. And I go up and I meet him, and I'm like, so, besides Zappa, what do you like? And he goes, oh, you would have never heard of any of the bands that I like. And I'm like, well, who? And he goes, Ultravox, XTC, blah, and then he starts rattling off Psychedelic Furs, and I'm like, what? Who? Wow. So anyway, he's like, there's a punk store in Pittsburgh called Jim's Records, and he goes, and we're going Saturday. Do you want to go? I'm like, yes. So Jason Pettigrew is 100% responsible for, like, in 1980 I met him, and then he's like, we're going to see the Pretenders. Do you want to go? We're going, and then he would start dragging me. At those shows, I met Bill Slam, Bill Ebersol, who was like super hardcore, Eric Bauer, and then they started making me tapes. The first tape that Bill Slam made me had the Meatmen, the Necros, Red Cross, Misfits, Gun Club, all in one cassette. And so I'm like, once I found the guy who was my connect, but I remember the first time I went to Jim's, I went in and I had $5. So I bought Dead Kennedys, Too Drunk to Fuck single, and I bought the Annie Nowhere League, Streets of London, So What. Those are the first 2 punk records I owned. Annie Nowhere League, which is like a very cliched, like, right. Later both massacred by Metallica or whatever. Like, household names now, but at the time, like, and I was like, ooh, punk, and then I started like going to gyms, and like at that time you could, the bins were just filled with, X, and everything was $3. Flesh Eaters, $3. X, $3. TSOL, $3. So if you could save $20, you could go down and get a really nice handful of records. And I just started going to gyms, and then I started going to shows. And then when I met Bill Slam, he's like, there's local bands. And I was like, local punk bands. And then they took me to my first show, which was the 5 in Radio Hanoi. Radio Hanoi was a short-lived band, but Sam Matthews was in it, who was later in, well, he's in the 6 right now. I mean, he's still playing. He's older than me. I think he's been in 50 bands. I think he said, he's that guy of Pittsburgh. But we went to his house, and and I went through his record collection, and he had like Sparks records, and I'm like, oh, it's okay to like this. I'm like, so you can like glam and punk, and like it just it all opened. So I was in high school, but thank God Bill Slam took me, and then Eric Bauer drove me, and Jason. So once I met them. And then there was the connection to Pittsburgh, which was like going to Pittsburgh was a big deal. The night Erg, the movie Erg, A Music War. Yeah. Are you aware of that? Okay, it has
the cassettes from that movie.
Yes, it has Devo and Gary Newman and the Go-Go's, but it also has the Dead Kennedys and Chelsea and Athletico Spiz and all this stuff. And I went, and it was showing, and I was not allowed to drive to Pittsburgh, so I was like, I don't even know if I had my license yet. I was 15. I had a permit, but I was working at Eaton Park. I had a job. I was, I worked after school. I worked in a restaurant, and I drove to Pittsburgh. Oh my God, I got in so much trouble, but I had to see Erg because like the Cramps were in it, and it's like all these bands you would hear about, but I finally got to see. So that movie was so important to me because I got to see, and they showed it at the Stanley Theater, like where I later saw, well, hell, I saw everyone from Rush to the Gang of Four at this venue, but it was everybody played there. But they showed this movie on the big screen. It was like game changer, and and then I would go to gyms, and then if I couldn't go to gyms, I would tell him I would tell Jason, I'd be like, get me the Dead Kennedys album, get me the Fear album, get me Black Flag, get me and so sometimes I could go, sometimes I couldn't. I was grounded a lot, because it's like. It's something like, and then the weirdest thing I ever did was voluntarily cut my hair, because previous to that I was into like I went to, let's see, I saw Van Halen, I saw Ted Nugent, I saw Rush, I saw Styx, I was like a typical doof, and then but then my cousin took me to see Frank Zappa, and then then through Frank Zappa I found Captain Beefheart, blah blah blah, and everything else. But it's Jason Pettigrew is 100% responsible for getting me into punk rock. So I all you need is that back then, and then once you found gyms, he sold Flipside. So about Flipside number 30, I remember, it had Red Cross on the cover. I remember the first Flipside I ever got. MRR didn't exist yet, but and it was like a zine. It was like, oh my God, LA, like, and I remember like there's a picture of social. The first time I ever saw a picture of Mike Ness, I remember like I'm like at home, like, oh my God, they look so cool. What is this? It was like 81, I guess, So it was like, but it was hard to get info, but you did, and I made a Social Distortion shirt. I cut a stencil and spray painted it, and I made like a Flipper shirt and a Fear shirt and all that, And when I graduated, I was wearing a homemade spray painted Fear shirt under my cap and gown. I was really, really punk rock, and I couldn't wait to. But anyway, Bill Slam introduced me to local bands, and then I saw Dress Up as Natives and Ground Zero and Car Sickness, and we had a local scene, but we didn't have hardcore. And then when I moved there, I was determined to start a hardcore band, and did, And the guys I enlisted were like Vince, the guitar player, who was later in Half-Life with me, was really into hardcore. But the other two guys, Russell was like, he was a stoner, he's like, he grew pot in his room under like, a fucking fluorescent light and all that. He loved the Ramones though. He was like that guy. He was like the stoner guy, Ramones, And then there was Steve Heineman on bass, and he was into Gong, Can, Cluster, Egg, Vandergraaf Generator. It was totally prog, King Crimson. But we were like hardcore, and he's like, this will be an interesting experiment. So you have this guy who could play jazz, playing bass in this hardcore. That's why we didn't sound like anybody else, really. We were never like a thrash band. We were aspiring to do better, you know, and it's kind of crazy. When I listen to Real Enemy now, the few times I've heard them in my adult life, I'm amazed at how angry I was.
Yeah.
That's what freaks me out about it. If you play, you could play a clip of. There's a song called Ignorant Hate. I think it's 20 seconds long.
I'll link to it on the blog.
You could play.
All the stuff's online.
Yeah, but you could play that. I mean, I'm so mad in that song. But then I'm mad because I got beat up by rednecks and kids put snuff in my hair. And the thing that used to freak me out about punk rock was like if you did anything, if you cut your hair short, if you made it spiky, God forbid you dyed your hair, had a mohawk, wrote. One time I had to get off a bus because I had the word discharge written on my jeans. I had the discharge logo, and these guys were going to beat me up, and I had to get off the bus, like way not near my exit. But luckily it cost $1 to ride a bus. There's no way those guys were getting off. You know, they weren't going to lose their $1 to beat up some weirdo, but then I had to fucking walk home or whatever. But I mean, like, I was definitely punk when you were taking your life in your own hands, you know, by being that, especially in Pittsburgh when I got there. But previous to that, like, I used to marvel at, like, I'm like, okay, so I have short hair, and I'm wearing a shirt that says Devo. Okay. These guys are shaving their heads and painting them like Steelers helmets. You know, that was perfectly fine. You know, that was like, yeah. You know, like, people did dumbass shit constantly all around me that was perfectly fine. But you were like a target because they didn't know what it was. It was too new. There was no reference for that. MTV didn't exist. There was, not that MTV was that bastion of hardcore punk. Although when they first started, they used to show the Kraut video for All Twisted. Yeah. Kraut made a video, and they showed it was in regular rotation. Like, you could see a legitimate New York hardcore band on MTV briefly, and then once ZZ Top made videos, once Pat Benatar figured out it was a good medium, that all that the weird stuff got. You know, because at first it was mostly British bands that had videos. You could see Ten Pole Tudor, like, you know, Clash, whatever. It was pretty punk, kind of, when it started. But then it was also like, you know, the aforementioned Pat Benatar, whoever. It was all that, and all that new wave. There was just all those really, you know, sappy bands too. But you could catch. There was some stuff in there. I mean, they showed Adam and the Ants or whatever and all that. But it was hard, like to your point, it was hard to just even find out about punk or to get it we were so isolated from it. But once I met Jason, then we had this he had a couple of guys, Tony, this other guy, Jim, who had cars, and they would go to Jim's once a week. So we had this, like, Jim's Records. I mean, Jim Spitzenagel is a good friend of mine. We're friends on Facebook now, and we interact with each other, and he's a great guy. He retired. He quit and sold the business, and it's been sold twice since, but it's still there, and it still has the same Clash posters up and stuff it had in the 80s. It's like, you know, it was called Soundcat until recently. Carl Hendricks owned it, and he bought off this guy Paul. It was called Paul CDs, but it keeps changing hands, but it's still there. Mike Siemens, who has Mindcure, owned it. But so in Pittsburgh, there was no shortage of records. You could get any damn record you wanted, and that, thank God, you know. So we had good record stores, plural. There's a handful of them. And so once I found out how to get punk rock and zines and records, that satisfied me only for a little while. Then it's like, no, we need bands now. Now we really have to, you know. So I took it upon myself to do that, you know, and did. And it's, you know, the Pittsburgh scene. It's really funny, you know. The guys in like Anti-Flag they're very reverent to me. Yeah. When I see them, I'm like, oh my, you know, you were our first show, you know. And I'm like, thank you very, you know. They're very aware of the history, and they're very polite to me, and I get a lot of respect from that younger generation who are now like old compared to kids. You know, I went by Gilman, I don't know, a month ago, and they were loading in, and they were kids loading out of their parents' cars. They were not old enough to, like, little kids, you know. So I mean, when I was 30, somebody who was 15 was super young. Now that I'm 50, that's like, that's like an alien. I'm like, what is this little person with a big amp, you know? You know, so, but the Smugglers are reformed. They're going to play, and I'm going to go to Gilman and see them, of course. Yeah.
We're going to one night.
January. Yeah, we bought tickets for a show at Gilman.
Yeah. Oh. We're going to see the Tilt and the Criminals.
Yeah.
It's going to be, like, really weird.
I don't know what night the Smugglers are playing, but I would never miss them. They're like dear friends, and I mean, that whole era when, you know, I was with Kathy for 8 years, and she owned Lookout Records the whole time, and so every one of those bands stayed at our house, and we got to be very friendly with some of them, Ted Leo specifically, but the Smugglers were my favorite. They have like 5 remarkable personalities, and they're this really interesting band, and they were good, and just, you know, and a really long time ago, Grant told me it was happening, but like, don't tell anyone yet. Yeah. But so yeah, I'm gonna go. I don't know if there's a guest list at Gilman. God, I hope so. I doubt it. Probably have to join.
Right.
I think
you better pay your membership.
I think my card from '87 is probably expired.
Probably.
I had to buy one. No, you didn't have to buy one. No, I got one. I went there briefly.
Yeah, you paid like the $2, I think,
was it?
to get a card, and
when I first moved,
$5
when I first moved here, I went to a couple of shows there. I remember Christmas Eve, Poison Idea played in '89, and I went, and that was my last pit. Yeah, they're playing, and this pit broke out. I'm like, yeah, Poison Idea, and I got it, and I was out of step, and I was getting punched in the head, and like, I made like one circle, like, pulled my, it was like a cartoon with a, where you see like a ball of dust, and every now and then a fist or a foot flies out of it, and I got the hell out. So I retired from the pit in '89. I've not been in the pit in the '90s, 2000s, or subsequently I have not, so I can pinpoint the second where I'm like, I'm too old for this shit. And I was 24, by the way. Yeah. So I was just like, but I'd been doing it for a long time at that point. But, I went to see, I would go there occasionally. Then I quit going. Then I was going to see Tad and The Fluid and all that, all those bands. And the Gasoffer era started and all that. Then I was starting to go to Garage Shock, and I was into all the local stuff. And I quit going to Gilman. Then when I met Kathy, she was like, you got to go see the Peaches. Specifically, and I went to see them, and I was like, "Oh my God, I love them!" And I loved them. And Chriser was such a charismatic frontman. Kathy is 100% responsible for getting me to reset into punk, and that's when I saw AFI and Screw 32 and whatever was happening then. I was like, "Oh man, this is good." And Rancid, their first record was out, and of course I'd seen Operation Ivy. I saw them in Pittsburgh. I saw them open for Fugazi, their next to the last show at the Women's Building, and I was friendly with them and everything. And when they were in Downfall, I remember seeing Lint. I guess we're supposed to call him Tim now. I call him Lint. And he was on the street, and we were always very friendly. But then Kathy went out with Matt from Rancid. That was like her ex, so she took the picture of the the back cover on their first record, which says Gilman there, under Gilman Street sign. Kathy took that picture, and she was a photographer. That's what she went to school. She went to school in Santa Cruz. She took photography. But anyway, I started going to those shows again, and then I had like a real, that was like a real reset, because she was not that much younger than me, 5 years younger than me. But I started going to see younger bands again, and then I started going to see the Queers all the time and all that, and it was great. So then I had everything. Then I had all that. I had all the bands that I would have worked with, like Man or Astro Man in that era, and all that. And then I was going to see her, and then she liked what I liked what her liked. So I mean, we were, I would say in the mid '90s, it was nothing to go out 4 days a week, if not 5, and it just continued. It went on and on and on, and eventually Kathy outlasted me. I couldn't go out that much anymore. I remember her being like, "You got to go. It's Mates of State, or it's whatever." Whoever was like, I remember her like. Sleater Kinney, whatever that era. I'm like, oh, I can't go out every night anymore. I can't do it, But she and she's, to my knowledge, she still goes out every night. Yeah, she lives in Brooklyn now, and we're still very good friends. And she came to my 50th birthday party. I had it in New York City. And it was crazy. My friend Dave Martin DJ'd, and it was great. And Eric from the New Bomb Turks, and anybody from Pittsburgh who moved there, anybody who I knew who lived there came, and it was really awesome. And I really had a good one for now 51. I had just started working at the car dealership, and I'm sitting at the desk, and it's dead. And the guy Fadi, who's from he's from Beirut, and he's sitting there. He's like, "Hey," and I go, "It's my birthday." He goes, "I buy you a sandwich." So I went from having this giant party in New York City to a guy from a Lebanese man buying me a sandwich. So I hope this year is a little better. I'm hoping to pick it back up to some of its former glory. You remember those parties I had for my birthday?
Sure.
Epic, huge at Ricky's, Gambino, everybody, all the Cole, whoever, the Espinosa brothers, everybody would come to that. It was just wonderful, and I did that for years. And then it got smaller. As the magazine went away, the crowd got, I knew when to bail. I was like, it's, I didn't want it to just be me like happy, sitting crying with a cupcake, with like a bent candle in it or something, Yeah, I didn't let it get that low. I bailed out beforehand, but no, it's been all that. So. How did that start? I'm not even sure where we started on that one. You know, punk rock. You asked me how I got into punk rock.
Yeah.
How I found out.
Good story.
I still love it. I have an iPod that I inherited. My most recent ex gave me. Actually, I don't think she knows I have it. Oh well, this podcast may cost me an iPod, but I loaded it up, and it's literally like the Addicts and and TSOL and but like Cron Gen and Blitz and that and GBH and The Exploited and it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like that and the Dead Boys and whatever, the Clash and the Professionals and the Sex Pistols and all, and I listen, and the Ruts and that's what I listen to. That's like, I sold a Cardo guy who was 86, and he was like, will you help pair my five? And I'm like, wow, you have an iPhone, cool. And he's like, well, I want to play my music. And it was the coolest thing ever. He was 86 years old, and his iPod was full of like Woody Herman and Artie Shaw, and it was all big band. It was like his music. And then I realized, like, you know what, you carry it with you. Yeah. And I'll always have punk rock. I'll always have it. So when I play it, it doesn't sound, if you're listening to the really good stuff, it doesn't sound dated at all. Yeah. It sounds fantastic actually. And like it makes my commute, I drive to San Rafael, it's 24 miles each way. So I have a 50 miles a day. I'm in my car, and I just, punk rock makes it go so much better. If I'm cleaning, if I have to do dishes, Bad Religion, boom, the sink, they're done. It's like it's still, I'm still totally punk rock, but I can't imagine like going to Gilman and getting in the pit or something. Yeah. I'd be this weird old fat guy. Like I can't be. I don't want to be that guy. But the music stays with you forever. It shaped it's the fabric of my soul. It shaped everything I am. Yeah. And when you're like a lone weirdo, like I was, like out in this rural area, and the kids, they weren't even listening to rock. They were listening to Charlie Daniels and stuff. Where I'm from, it was like, and Willie Nelson, and it was country, like the aforementioned Outlaws and Skinnerd. The kids would pay me to paint the back of their jean jackets logos, and I did many a Leonard Skinner flag, and for $5 or whatever. And it's funny. I did ZZ Top jackets. It's very funny because I'm friends with Billy Gibbons now, and I painted that. I used to get paid to paint like the cowboy from ZZ Top's Greatest Hits. I painted that on several people's jackets. Yeah. Well, I had acrylic paint, and you would just paint. And I eyeballed it. I didn't have a overhead projector. I just did it, and it looked great. And it was like, so that I guess that was the peak of my artistic endeavor, like painting Southern rock pants on people's jackets. But anyway, so later on, the punk rock came along at exactly the right time. I often think if I was 30 years younger, would I be into techno and house and all that, or would I do all that? Whatever was the most cutting edge thing right now. And there's all that weird stuff, mashups and things kids make. And you ever see that stuff that looks like bad Atari games video? You know what I'm talking? They like that. People fetishize the music that was soundtracks of antiquated video games, and they mixed that with and all that. I mean, like, I wonder if I would have done that, because hardcore was certainly the most happening thing in 1981. Certainly. I mean, it was very underground and very, and you had to know someone to know about it, and it wasn't on TV except for Fear being on Saturday Night Live. Right. Halloween 1981. I saw King Crimson that day at CMU, and we rushed back so we could catch Fear. And we're like, what the hell, And it's so funny because I know almost all the guys who were in it.
They bust them in, right?
They came from D.C.,
Yeah, and that's why they were all anti-New York.
Yeah, the Necros. Ian yells New York sucks. That's Ian MacKay yelling that on that. Yeah. But the Necros are there. If I watch them now, I'm like, look, Barry, Andy, Tesco V, they're all there. Huh. But there's people from New York there too. T-Shirt Tony, the singer of Ultraviolence, is there. There's New York punks too, but it's to get that crowd. I don't know if they bust them in.
That's what I heard. They actually bust them in from another show that day
in DC.
That's
the majority of those kids are from DC. Huh. Like Void are there. Yeah. But you can see Barry from the Necros. He gets on stage for a minute and he has a Pagan's jacket. And he's like, 17 or whatever. there he is on national TV slamming, you know. And I remember and then I saw the Necros a year later or whatever. No. I didn't see the Necros till March 6, 1983 at the 930 Club. It was Necros, Faith, Meatmen. And I went, and that's when I met Barry. And he was like, I'm like, oh man, I love you guys, my first show. And he's like, Johnny come lately. So I'm like 18, but I was, quote, Johnny come lately to him. You know, and he's my age, you know. Well, he's 19. He's a year older than me. It's just so funny, that, you know. It didn't take long, but that's the thing in the hardcore scene. When you met them, they were your age, they were your peers. You became friends with them. There was, you know what I mean. There was really no barrier between band and audience whatsoever.
One thing that was a lot different, I think, for your generation versus mine is. Back then, punk rock was very participatory. Like, there weren't just people downloading songs and buying clothes and just going about their life. It was like...
I guarantee but nobody was downloading songs. It was 3 years before that famous Apple commercial, you know, where they throw the hammer at the... I mean, you couldn't even get a home computer, so I guarantee you nobody was downloading anything.
It wasn't a spectator sport back then.
No. In fact, the reason that the big boys broke up, Tim Kerr said, is I got the sense that everybody there wasn't there to form a band or do a fanzine, or it became like a show. That's why they broke up. There's a documentary coming out about them that I'm in. I was interviewed for it, which I'm, again, grateful for. I'm hopefully right between... you know, Keith Morris and, you know, Gary Floyd or whatever, you know, but it's great that I get asked to participate in these things, and but that's coming out, and like that's when I interviewed Tim for Maximum Rock and Roll. That's why they felt like not everyone there was there to do something anymore. In '84, they were like, screw this, you know, and then of course he started playing again, but he got in the funk band, Bad Mother Goose and Poison 13 were like, you know, pre-grunge or whatever. They were very influential to Green River and Mudhoney and all those bands eventually. But he played music again, of course, but it was garage, and then that had its own... I think the garage scene in its infancy, when early 90s now, was very participatory. Everybody, you know, almost everyone had a zine or a label or this or this or this. You could count on one hand how many people were there just to drink and watch the band. I mean, everybody was somebody. And it was really like circling back around to that. You know, I really embraced the garage scene because it was that DIY ethos again, big time. Yeah. You know, and I loved Untamed Youth. I loved Deke Dickerson, and they were so fun. They made these videos that they would sell on VHS tapes of goofy shit they would do, and there's they made a video when they were in high school, and they put that on there, and it's just like I loved that, you know. And they were in Missouri, so they had their problems going around covering the dictators or whatever they were trying to accomplish, but it was great. I mean, but they had a zine, the Untamed World, they had all that. Like you know, there was a lot of people that were really savvy, you know, and you know, the guys in the Mummies are charismatic, and the Phantom Surfers are charismatic. They're interesting guys, and they collected, you know, they had big retro collections and old cars and all that. It was like, you know, that's where I really found the audience for the magazine eventually. But I wanted to introduce a punk element. If you look at Gearhead, I would always review AFI and Rancid. You know, I pushed that stuff because I didn't want to. I don't know if any then that age gap comes in. So, you know, I'm hanging out with younger people and listening to that, and these older ones are like Link Ray or nothing. You know, I'm like, well, you know, you'd really like AFI actually, or whatever it was. You know, like, you know, and just trying to keep it all moving forward. You know, but that's a big job. That's a big job for one guy. I'll let you or someone else do that. I'm fine, not being responsible for it anymore. Yeah, that was easy. So anyway.
Awesome. I think that's pretty good. I think if we go any longer, people are gonna start.
Yeah. Oh, don't go longer. Edit it.
Yeah. Well, man. Thank you
this was
so
live.
much.
You didn't know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be great. Yeah. Well, it would cost me an iPod, maybe.
You want that cut out?
Yeah. What?
You want that cut out?
No. No, but I'm just saying that I still listen to punk rock all the time, like more than ever. In the car is a great place to listen to music. You know, you can play as loud as you want, and windows down. Like, go by. You know, if a CHP has someone pulled over on that side, I'm like, you know, hate the cops. Still, why? I have no idea. Anyway, did you turn it off?
No. Let me wrap it up, I guess. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh.
This was a lot of fun.
Well, I've never met anyone who doesn't like talking about themselves for 2 hours. So it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, that's it. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Josie, for sitting down and having the conversation. I had a really great time, and I hope it was fun to listen to. So that's it. That's all I got. Thank you so much for listening.